Stay up to date with everything iconic by following us on all of our social media. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like our videos. Due to monetization restrictions, you can support us by going to patreon.com/theiconicpodcast and make a monthly pledge. We are happy to announce the launch of the Iconic Label, where you can go to theiconiclabel.com and purchase an ever-expanding line of merchandise and gear. And now, without further ado, enjoy part 2 of Communist Subversion.
Authoritarianism is not, alas, the stuff of dystopian fantasy, but of an emerging reality.
Their policy depends on deception and secrecy.
Power, money, and control.
Surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step.
War is for profit. It's for the profit of the top 10%.
We're either being paid or being played.
You do not need to wear a medical mask.
It is corrupt, it is corrupting, it is corrosive to our national defense.
And suppress your population.
The media didn't know, and it would take us years to find out.
The piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
CFR membership as the ruling establishment in the United States.
They're planning on millions of acres taken by eminent domain. Our national sovereignty is under threat.
I've been in the news business for about 2 decades. I'd never heard of it. That's because the organizers don't really want you to know about it.
Most blatant abuse.
I mean, of course there were insider deals. Of course it was payback.
Isn't this all about political control, politics, and big business? The whole thing's a sham.
Stop buying masks. They don't work.
They had the motive. They had the monetary gain.
The whole thing is a fake.
Crime against the peace.
These guys should be brought up on charges.
Biggest tort case ever. The Corona fraud scandal.
They didn't isolate as a virus.
Viruses have never been isolated.
Guys like Welch get up there and start talking, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face.
Like, there's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
Viewing the history of the world as a history of warfare between secret societies that well-established upper-class families with old money who founded and financed the Bilderberg Group, Bohemian Grove, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Club of Rome, the Rhodes Trust, Skull and Bones, Trilateral Commission, and similar think tanks and private clubs are illuminated conspirators plotting to impose a totalitarian New World Order, the implementation of an authoritarian world government controlled by the United Nations, and a global central bank which maintains political power through the financialization of the economy, regulation and restriction of speech through the concentration of media ownership, mass surveillance, widespread use of state terrorism, and an all-encompassing propaganda that creates a cult of personality around a puppet world leader and ideologizes world government as the culmination of history's progress. That was Michael Birkin in his book, A Culture of Conspiracy, Apocalyptic Visions in Contemporary America. He gives a critique of the New World Order concept, and he goes on to say that in this view, the New World Order is being implemented gradually, citing the formulation of the U.S. Federal Reserve System in 1913, the League of Nations in 1919, the International Monetary Fund in 1944, the United Nations and the World Bank in 1945, the World Health Organization in 1948, the European Union and the Euro currency in 1993, the World Trade Organization in 1998, the African Union in 2002, and the Union of the South American Nations in 2008. All major milestones, though he doesn't include the International Telecommunications Union in 1865, the International Telegraph Union in 1874, the Postal Union also in 1874, and the International Peace Conference in 1899. We mentioned Barkin's summary to give the viewer a destination, a heads up to where they are going. Socialism is the vehicle, or the how they intend to get us there. In Communist Subversion Part 1, a plan for total worldwide control, we've echoed Barkin's summary. We mentioned there's a war with an unseen enemy who lives in the shadows but operates in plain sight. We said that their symbols are everywhere. The symbols reveal who they actually are. They communicate out in the open. They telegraph everything that they're going to do. They have a monopoly on public opinion. And what they are implementing is nothing less than worldwide communism in the name of social justice in a two-phase revolution, one violent and one nonviolent. The nonviolent Fabian form of the revolution presents the most dangerous threat as it calls for the gradual, systematic transition of government power by stealth and secrecy through peace and politics by the 4 stages of ideological subversion: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization, using pincer military tactics, pinching the majority through politicians and protesters to implement socialism, gaining government control and ownership over all private property, the means of production, and all avenues of trade, thus providing the Cecil Rhodes and Milner Roundtable groups, their sub-organizations, and various more powerful NGOs, and their brainchild, the United Nations, eventual total world control through the emergent global government, first under the guise of global cooperation, then global governance through the World Federation of Nations, culminating in a single world government, which is why now they're using socialism to centralize private property into the hands of the state and out of the hands of its citizens. John Welch of the John Birch Society gives us a 10-step strategy in addition to Bezmenov's ideological subversion and Griffith's pincer military tactics to remove American sovereignty piece by piece and step by step.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Now, here are the aims for the United States. 1, greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible.
We see this clearly in major events that require the United States government to borrow money in large sums. And one of the best examples of it is the war on terror and the Cost Plus program in Iraq.
It was a promise the Bush administration was not able to keep, assuring the nation at the outset of the war that the military would finish the mission in Iraq quickly for less than $100 billion.
By any measure, the U.S. government has spent a fortune in Iraq, at least $437 billion so far.
$12 billion a month in Iraq.
Estimated interest on borrowed war funds is $800 billion. Plus there's $600 billion for replacing military equipment and restoring pre-war troop levels. And another $600 billion for providing long-term medical care and disability compensation for wounded veterans.
Government investigators say billions have been lost to fraud, mismanagement, or bad bookkeeping. And the spending won't end when the fighting does.
The problem with the war is we're getting nothing for it.
If there's any question as to what it's an allegory for, I will tell you. It is the powers that be in the United States of America. It's profiteers. War is for profit. It's not to save the world for democracy or for king and country. No, bullshit. It's for the profit of the top 10%.
The Cost Plus program in Iraq, where the United States government borrows money and then it pays it to contractors who are then incentivized to run up the cost because the contractors are going to get a percentage of the total amount wasted.
Cost Plus encourages you to run up the cost of a program because you are going to get a percentage of the end result.
These contracts are managed under a system called Cost Plus, which is the opposite of trying to save money. It guarantees that everything that you buy will be paid back and reimbursed if it's seen as justified, and you'll be given a profit in addition.
A Cost Plus arrangement that critics say leaves little incentive to save. The more taxpayer dollars Halliburton spends, the more Halliburton makes.
It was so lavish. Rows of vegetable platters, beef platters, fish platters.
It's a Cost Plus contract. KBR looked at it, the more money we spend, that's more money we get in our pockets. The soldiers are sleeping on these little cots out in the middle of the desert, while these KBR executives are driving these $40,000 vehicles.
They and their secretaries are driving at least a $30,000 to $40,000 vehicle.
Why do they need an H2 Hummer? Why do they have Cadillac Escalades in Iraq? for Halliburton managers? What is the purpose?
One invoice that I saw was for about $7,000 for 1 month for a SUV on a lease. It was a 3-year contract. Comes up to roughly $250,000. A vehicle that you and I could purchase at the local dealership for probably top of the line $45,000. And the taxpayer paid $250,000.
And you can see it when you look at the actual contracts that are awarded. You know, Dick Cheney's former company, Halliburton, received $18.5 billion. The subsidiary of Halliburton, which was KBR, or Keller, Brown and Root, they received a $7 billion contract for reconstruction and troop support. Parsons got $5.3 billion for engineering and construction. DynCorp International got $1.9 billion for police training. Transatlantic Traders got $5 million for surveillance aircraft. CACI got $1.62 billion in contracts. Titan got $2.05 billion in military service contracts. Blackwater received a whole host of contracts, one of which was $21 million just to guard Paul Bremer while he was there.
The contracting business in Iraq is very, very lucrative.
This war has been privatized to a greater extent than any other war in history.
They're part of a multi-billion-dollar industry fueled by your tax dollars.
40 cents out of every dollar Congress controls now goes to contractors.
There's more than 20,000 private military on the ground.
You have the second largest armed force in Iraq, or private security.
Monopoly and cartel behavior. It is corrupt, it is corrupting, it is corrosive to our national defense.
We can see with these contracts where you're incentivized to run up the cost because by running up the cost, you get a percentage of the total bill.
It was all a scam. Halliburton was charging $45 for a six-pack can of like Coke or Pepsi that they give us and the military free in the mess hall. The little mobile units that we had to put our clothes in like a net duffel bag, Halliburton charged the government $100 for every bag of clothes they washed.
Because they get $99 a bag for a bag of laundry that I could do at home for $3.
A legal way of stealing from the government or taxpayers' money.
They got the wrong equipment, ordered the wrong stuff, computers stealing boxes, new vehicles. They'd push them out in what they called burn pits. And they just set it on fire, claim it as a loss, get more money for the right equipment or the right stuff they needed.
Order somebody else's wrong equipment just because somebody pays you to do it, and you burn it and destroy it.
You got brand new trucks over there, and there's not even oil filters. So when the motor blows, what do? Buy a new truck and bill the government. $75,000 truck. They wouldn't even have a spare tire to fit it, and we had to blow it up. And they didn't care Halliburton did because the government's paying for it.
Every day that a vehicle broke down, we would have to destroy it. And these are maybe $80,000 vehicles, maybe $100,000. You know, they're expensive trucks, entire convoys where every flatbed truck was empty.
By running empty trucks on the convoys and billing the government for them.
And it seems there wasn't no purpose in it. When you went up empty and you come back empty. And your buddy's getting killed for no cause at all. Not even as much as a Band-Aid on the truck. That's how Halliburton was making their killing, making their money.
2, higher and then much higher taxes.
The higher taxes, of course, are levied to pay these extravagant wars.
In Iraq, it is your money that's being used.
And live exercises.
This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here.
I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
3, an increasingly unbalanced budget, despite the higher taxes.
The national debt is engineered to go only one way, higher.
4, wild inflation of our currency.
By increasing the money supply.
Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. And the politicians say, hey, thanks for that. And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely the symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed, and there is nothing else. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe $4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue. And that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The Founding Fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt, but now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money for the simple fact that you can't print them.
5. Government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation.
This is a tried and true method for securing further state control, i.e. socialism, or state control over private property, the means of production, and the avenues of trade. But they're going a little bit further to get the actual foundations of the avenues of trade, which are predicated upon resources.
6. Greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives.
This is the whole COVID mass track and trace, lockdown, quarantine, and shutting down the economy, killing the middle class through socialist essential business propaganda that the entire business class simply obeyed, straight out of the Milgram experiment.
The results, as I observe them in the laboratory, are disturbing. They raise the possibility that human nature cannot be counted on to insulate men from brutality and inhumane treatment at the direction of malevolent authority. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. If in this study an anonymous experimenter could successfully command adults to subdue a 50-year-old man and force on him painful electric shocks against his protests, one can only wonder what government, with its vastly greater authority and prestige, can command of its subjects.
This is to be accompanied naturally and automatically by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government.
This reminds me of what happens right after 9/11, where the money just goes flying out.
What happens after 9/11 is this tremendous ramping up.
The money just came out of Congress, goes flying out.
And control, government control, is increased immensely, but entirely in secret.
All in secret. The public didn't know, the media didn't know, and it would take us years to find out.
7. Far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states.
They're using Cyrus the virus to do that now.
You are clear to release. His name is Cyrus Grissom, a.k.a. Cyrus the Virus.
Cyrus the virus doesn't care about city, county, state, or national lines. He doesn't care about race, color, religion, or socioeconomic status. Cyrus the virus is the great unifier, bringing humanity together as one.
8. The steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education.
It was Utant, the third Secretary General of the United Nations, says, "The world will not change and find peace if there is not new education." Guidebook is quoted by John Stormer, and None Dare Call It Treason, Liberty Bell Press, 1964, page 112. The study of history raises problems of value which are better postponed until the pupil is freed from the nationalistic prejudices which at present surround the teaching of history. Even further, as we have pointed out, it is frequently the family that infects the child with extreme nationalism. The school should therefore use the means described earlier to combat family attitudes. This will culminate under Robert Mueller, the former Assistant Secretary General, who created what's known as the World Core Curriculum, which is being implemented in every school system around the world.
9. A constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare.
with the sole aim of making the Americans lean towards international cooperation, primarily to the United Nations as the world's referee or peacekeepers, but
Peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government, which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
part of the plan requires the gradual surrender of the United States, piece by piece and bit by bit, step by step. But to whom? We mentioned that it was Cecil Rhodes who, using his diamond and gold fortune and his 7 wills to establish a secret society, in his confession of faith he notes, the idea of gleaming and dancing before one's eyes like the will of a wisp at last forms itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society, but with one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule, for the recovery of the United States, and for making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire? Previously, we mentioned Carroll Quigley, who, in his book Tragedy and Hope, details the life of Cecil Rhodes, who created a secret society to control the world using central banks. And on page 324, he notes why the use of a central bank. He says, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. He then details how this was to be accomplished. He continues and says, this system was to be controlled in feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived in frequent and private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the central banks, which themselves were private corporations. Each central bank in the hands of men like Sir Montague Norman of the Bank of England, Benjamin Strong in the New York Federal Reserve Bank, Charles Rist of the Bank of France, Jean Marchak of the Reichsbank. These sought to dominate the government by their ability to control treasury loans, to manipulate foreign exchanges, to influence to the level of economic activity in any country, and to influence cooperative politicians by subsequent economic rewards in the business world. Cecil Rhodes' secret society was formally established on February 5th, 1891. On page 132, Quigley says, in this secret society, Rhodes was to be the leader. Stead, Brett, Lord Esher, and Milner were to form an executive committee. Arthur, Lord Balfour, Sir Harry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, and Albert Lord Grey, and others were listed as members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers, later organized by Milner into the Round Table organization. Thus, the central part of the secret society was established by March of 1891. Previously, in 1888, in his third will, Rhodes leaves everything to Lord Rothschild, referring to it as the matter discussed between us. Several of the Rhodes wills refer to secret societies and to Lord Rothschild, but the final will sets out the terms of what's known as the Rhodes Scholarship, administered by Rothschild. The scholarship's aim was to develop future leaders in the Rhodes mold. And so, in 1891, Cecil Rhodes, William Stead, Lord Esher, Rothschild, Salisbury, Rosebery, and Milner drew up a plan for a secret society, the Round Table, that aims to bring all habitable portions of the world under their influence and their control. The very next year, in 1892, Baron Alphonse de Rothschild flies to New York for secret talks at the headquarters of Standard Oil, owned by John D. Rockefeller. The Rockefellers later become the controllers of the entire organization and shift the power from a world empire based in Britain to a new world order, as we know it today, ran through Manhattan, with the United Nations as the front organization. David Rockefeller, in Memoirs in 2002, says, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe that we're part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated, global, political, and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. Franklin D. Roosevelt, in a letter to Edward Mandell House, November 21st, 1933, says, "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson." President Theodore Roosevelt, in Declaration of the Principles of the Progressive Party, 1912, an autobiography, page 578, says, "Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. To destroy this invisible government, to befoul this unholy alliance between corrupt business and corrupt politics, is the first task of statesmanship." Introduction to the Rockefeller File, 1976, by Gary Allen. He says, "The drive of the Rockefellers and their allies is to create a one-world government combining supercapitalism and communism under the same tent, all under their control." New York City Mayor John F. Hillen in 1922 is quoted as saying, "The real menace of our republic is this invisible government which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. Like the octopus of real life, it operates under the cover of a self-created screen. At the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both political parties." Hillen is correct in his assessment, but I would add that the scope of what he's aware of in his time is but a small fraction of the key players and goes far beyond the international bankers and the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests, involving many nations, corporations, think tanks, secret societies, central banks, occultists, intelligence services, and more. Cecil Rhodes's roundtable led to the founding of the U.S.-based Council on Foreign Relations, or the CFR.
For 100 years, the Council on Foreign Relations has been helping America play a vital part on the world stage. The Council has served as an invaluable resource for its members, policymakers, and the public by publishing bold new ideas, providing research and a forum for debate, and proposing policies. CFR has helped navigate the challenges of a changing world ever since it was born out of the ashes of a global conflict. While comprised at the time mostly of white Northeastern men, the Council's mission has endured through a century. The Council also launched a quarterly publication titled Foreign Affairs to produce analysis on important global issues. It quickly became the most influential journal on international relations in America, and soon the world, making its way to the desks of leaders like Vladimir Lenin. Council members produced nearly 700 memoranda, a roadmap for a post-war world order underpinned by American-led international organizations.
The actual objective of this highly exclusive club is revealed by the rare admissions of the insiders themselves. In short, they seek total and quiet control of the entire world. And the CFR is their most visible conduit for carrying out that agenda. Ruling Class Journalists, written by Richard Harwood, describes the CFR membership as the ruling establishment in the United States. The Washington Post article boasted that news reporters who are CFR members do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it. Who are these policymakers? Many of their faces are familiar. NBC's Tom Brokaw, CBS's Dan Rather, ABC's Barbara Walters, Jim Lehrer of PBS, William F. Buckley of National Review, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, owner of the giant multifaceted News Corporation. These media heavyweights, and many others like them, are members of the CFR. Powerful corporations are also invited to become members. At the close of the 20th century, CFR influence presided over far-reaching consolidations of media control. In 1995, CFR members Michael Eisner of Disney and ABC's Thomas Murphy merged their media empires. Soon after the merger, the Disney-ABC empire becomes a CFR corporate member. In the year 2000, the world's largest internet service provider, America Online, joins forces with Time Warner, one of the world's largest news organizations. The CEOs favoring the move are CNN's Thomas Johnson and Time Warner's Gerald Levin, both CFR members. Once again, another media giant is created under the shadow of CFR influence.
This question is for Ron Paul. I've met a lot of your supporters online, but I've noticed that a good number of them seem to buy into this conspiracy theory regarding the Council of Foreign Relations and some plan to make a North American Union by merging the United States with Canada and Mexico. These supporters of yours seem to think that you also believe in this theory. So my question to you is, do you really believe in all this, or are people just putting words in your mouth?
90 seconds.
Well, it all depends on what you mean by all of this. The CFR exists, the Trilateral Commission exists, and it's a, quote, conspiracy of ideas. This is an ideological battle. Some people believe in globalism, others of us believe in national sovereignty. And there is a move on toward a North American Union, just like early on there was a move on for a European Union, and it eventually ended up. So we had NAFTA and moving toward a NAFTA highway. These are real things. It's not somebody made these up. It's not a conspiracy. They don't talk about it, and they might not admit about it, but there's been money spent on it. There was legislation passed in the Texas legislature unanimously to put a hold on it. They're planning on millions of acres taken by eminent domain for an international highway from Mexico to Canada, which is going to make the immigration problem that much worse. So it's not so much a secretive conspiracy. It's a contest between ideologies, whether we believe in our institutions here, our national sovereignty, our Constitution, or are we going to further move in the direction of international government, more UN? You know, this country goes to war under UN resolutions. I don't like big government in Washington. So I don't like this trend toward international government. We have a WTO that wants to control our drug industry, our nutritional products. So I'm against all that, but it's not so much as a sinister conspiracy. It's just knowledge is out there. If we look for it, you'll realize that our national sovereignty is under threat.
Congressman Paul, thank you.
In Chatham House in London.
Chatham House works across these three areas: in international economics, in energy, environment and resource governance, and in regional and security studies. We publish reports, we publish papers, we hold discussions and conferences, and we discuss our ideas with policymakers from around the world.
Militaries around the world aspire to our standards and the ability of our forces to work together. Importantly, we can integrate other nations' contributions into complex multinational operations like no other organization.
Bilderberg Group was founded in 1954.
Well, what's going on is the Bilderberg Conference, an annual gathering of some of the biggest movers and shakers in business and politics. About 140 participants this year, including the chief executive of Google, the chancellor of this country, and the former head of the CIA turned executive for the private equity firm KKR. They're here at this event. If you've never heard of the Bilderberg Conference, don't be worried. I've been in the news business for about 2 decades. I'd never heard of it. That's because the organizers don't really want you to know about it. It is very secret, a very guarded affair.
Or the Club of Rome. in 1968.
The Club of Rome is a global network of independent and renowned thinkers. The Club of Rome analyzes today's challenges facing the world, their root causes, and the possible futures in a systematic and holistic manner to set in motion actions that by the middle of the century will ensure a more secure, equitable, and prosperous world.
The Trilateral Commission in 1973.
I'm Megan O'Sullivan. I am the new chair of the North America group of the Trilateral Commission. As you may know, the Trilateral Commission is a storied institution, an organization with 46 years of history. First and foremost, we are an organization that at its heart is a community of countries that share a common set of values. We have a membership that spans policy, business, and academia and media. We're an organization of people who have close ties to national governments, and often the ideas that we debate in private inform our own perspectives and inform our discussions and deliberations and conversations with people in positions of power. We no longer live in a world where governments are the only ones that can influence the future. In fact, increasingly, we have to think about other entities as being the real engines of change, and be that corporations or universities or even individuals. And we need to move ahead whether or not we're able to get our governments to agree with our prescriptions and recommendations.
A somewhat similar structure of organizations known as the Institute of Pacific Relations was set up in 12 countries holding territory in the Pacific area. In Canada, the nucleus of this group consisted of Milner's Roundtable friends at Oxford, Arthur Glazebrook and George Parkin, while in South Africa and India, the nucleus was made up of members of Milner's Kindergarten. These included Sir Patrick Duncan, B.K. Long, Richard Feetham, Sir Dougal Malcolm, Sir William Maris, James, Lord Meston, and their friend Malcolm, Lord Haley in India. The groups in Australia and New Zealand had been recruited by Stead through his magazine, The Review of Reviews. The power and influence of this Rhodes-Milner group in British imperial affairs and in foreign policy since 1889, according to Carol Quigley, although not widely recognized, can hardly be exaggerated. The Rhodes-Milner group was sometimes spoken of as the Cliveden set, named after the Astor County house where they sometimes assembled. And so the structure of the organization was modeled organizationally after the Jesuit order. But in the inner sanctum, it was clear that they modeled it after Weissaup's rings within rings of power, ensuring that their clandestine operations would never be discovered. And since they had no aversion to working with communists, capitalists, fascists, or freemen, it would seem that that any ideology fit their aim as long as it advanced empire. And so this is why we're currently seeing the implementation of Marxist ideologies through politicians and protesters, through these liberation movements who pretend to be about equity, equality, human dignity, human suffering, human flourishing, and the betterment of jobs and housing and food and Medicare, but in fact really are just about one idea and one idea only. When it comes to Marxism, they like the idea of the centralization of private property into the hands of the state. And instead of the state dissolving away because, everything can be harmonized, they simply remain in power indefinitely, legally, and unimpeachably. In the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx on page 25 and 26, in Revolutionizing the Mode of Production proposes 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purpose. 2. A heavier, progressive graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all rights of inheritance. 4. Confiscation of property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital as an exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. On page 34 in his Confessions of Faith, question 3 says, how do you wish to achieve this aim? The answer provided is by the elimination of private property and its replacement by community property, or simply stated, eminent domain. This means that, all property becomes the state's property, and then the state determines what the public can and cannot use and how it uses it. On page 25, he talks about the abolishment of countries, where he says, the communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them that which they have not gotten. So for these elite, there's this great opportunity here. It's an opportunity to preach these Marxist ideas, about, equity, equality, the plight of the suffering working class, its oppression by the bourgeois or the merchant class. They currently have political power. He says when the merchant class has political power, he defines it on page 27 of the Communist Manifesto. He says, political power properly so called is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. And so seizing upon all that rhetoric to speak to the heart of the working class men and women around the world, if they buy into these ideas, if they buy into ideas like class struggle, the oppressive merchant class, equity, equality, the masses may think that things will change for them if these socialistic ideas are implemented. But it's nothing but a trick, a ruse, a con game to get these people to vote in not only the people, but the policies that support the centralization of private property on all levels into the hands of the state. And in this way, according to Jan Kozak, Marx, Trotsky, and others, socialism is then implemented legally and peaceably in the name of the nation. But the roundtable groups, their sub-organizations, think tanks, and more powerful NGOs, and ultimately the United Nations, they don't care about socialism. The real goal, the real prize, is simply the centralization of power into the hands of the state, or state ownership and control over all private property, the means of production, and avenues of trade. This is what the roundtable groups are really all about. And so it's like what Marx says on page 22 of the manifesto, where he says, in this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. So now we see why they want to use socialism. It's like what David Allen Rivera, in his book Final Warning, A History of the New World Order, page 41, where he sums up Adam Weishaupt's goals. He says, Adam Weishaupt's goals were consolidated into the 6 points. Number 1, abolition of the monarchy and all ordered government. Number 2, abolition of private property. Number 3, the abolition of inheritance. Number 4, the abolition of patriotism. Number 5, the abolition of the family through the abolition of marriage, all morality, and the institution of communal education for children. Number 6, abolition of all religion. The purpose of the 6 points were to divide the people politically, socially, and economically, to weaken the countries, and to create a one-world government. He says, they testified that all religion, all love of country, and loyalty to sovereigns, were to be annihilated. This is what former World Health Organization Director Brock Chisholm says in a Christian World Report in March of 1991. He says, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, their loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. So we see that this narrative is nothing new, and it's been around for quite some time. But technically what they're implementing is what's known as scientific Marxism. So scientific Marxism is this idea that, the target group is an oppressed people dominated by an imperialistic power that has colonized and now is exploiting them. And so in most cases, it's 100% true. So using the validity of that claim, they believe that it's their historic duty to liberate the people from fascism, from imperialism, and from colonialism. And they identify themselves as the party of the people, and they want to liberate these people like they've done in China and Algeria, Cuba, and South Vietnam, and various other countries where they've implemented socialism. So liberation fronts and liberation movements then become the vehicle by which socialistic and later communistic goals are implemented through nonviolent means. As we've mentioned before, they're only using socialism, not because they care about the plight of the Marxist proletariat working class they pretend to protect, nor do they hate the erudite merchant bourgeois class that's imperialistic, colonialistic, and fascist, nor are they benevolent philanthropist humanitarians. Socialism for them is just a tool. It provides the moral reason under the guise of liberation movements, exploiting real human suffering by claiming to free minority groups in a society while espousing to mitigate poverty, class struggle, world hunger, unemployment, faltering healthcare systems, the environment that will certainly make it sound good to the world's flailing middle to lower class working masses, but it's also a politically useful tool for the centralization of power into an all-powerful government state that promises to take care of everyone so that there's no longer any haves and have-nots. Governments then, in this case, just provide the theater, the stage in which this political play gets performed. As John Coleman, in his book Committee of 300, page 5, puts it, he says, "The upper-level parallel secret government does not operate in dank basements and secret underground chambers. It places itself in full view of the White House, Congress, and in number 10 Downing Street in the Houses of Parliament. It's akin to those weird, supposedly terrifying monster films where the monster appears with distorted features, long hair, and even longer teeth, growling and slavering all over the place. This is a distraction. The real monsters wear business suits and drive to work on Capitol Hill in limousines. But I might add, these people are neither voted into office nor elected officials." In the end, the roundtable groups, their sub-organizations, their think tanks, and more powerful NGOs, and ultimately the United Nations, they don't want capitalism or communism. Those are just Hegelian thesis, antithesis, synthesis frameworks to provide problem, reaction, solution scenarios where crises can be created, controlled, and manipulated to predetermined ends where their motto, order out of chaos, or order out of chaos, brings about their predetermined ordered events out of their engineered chaos. In their thinking, both capitalism and communism are but two sides to the same coin in the hands of the roundtable groups going into the same slot machine in a global game called the New World Order. Michael L. Chadwick, who writes an introduction to Tragedy and Hope, he says, "There really is a system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. I call this system the World Trade Federation. It's an ultra-secret group of the most powerful men on earth. They now control every major international institution, every major multinational and transnational corporation, both public and private, every major international banking institution, every central bank, every nation state on earth, the natural resources on every continent, and the people around the world through complicated, interlocking networks that resemble a giant spider's web. This group is comprised of the leading family dynasties of Canada, the United States, Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, Russia, and China." He goes on to say that this group has developed an elaborate system of control that enables them to manipulate government leaders, consumers, and people throughout the world. They are in the last stages of developing a world empire that will rival the ancient Roman Empire. However, this new empire will rule the entire world and not just a goodly portion of it, as Rome did long ago. This group is responsible for the death and suffering of over 180 million men, women, and children. They are responsible for World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, etc. They have created periods of inflation and deflation in order to confiscate and consolidate the wealth of the world. They were responsible for the enslavement of over 2 billion people in all communist nations, Russia, China, Eastern Europe, etc. He goes on to say that inasmuch as they were directly responsible for the creation of communism in those nations, they built and sustained these evil totalitarian systems for private gain. They brought Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and Roosevelt to power and guided their governments from behind the scenes to achieve a state of plunder unparalleled in world history. He then goes on to say that the chief architects of this new world empire are planning another war, World War III, to eliminate any vestiges of political, economic, or religious freedom from the face of the earth. They will then completely control the earth and its natural resources. The people will be completely enslaved, just as the people were in the ancient Roman Empire. While the above may sound like fiction, I can assure you that it is true. I wish it was fiction, but it is not. It is reality. And again, he says that most people do not want to know that such a Machiavellian group of men spread strategically throughout the world really exists. They prefer to believe that all is well and that we are traveling down the road to world peace, global interdependence, and economic prosperity. This is not true. The fact that most people view this idea as espoused by Quigley, Chadwick, Sutton, and others as a farce, a fantasy too fantastic to concede to intellectually, shows how a perfect dictatorship can be erected in plain sight right under the noses of the general public. The term perfect dictatorship was popularized by a Peruvian writer, Mario Vargas Llosa, who in 1991, he outraged the Mexican political establishment by describing Mexico as the perfect dictatorship. Llosa understood that, to maintain a dictatorship in the modern times, to be hip and progressive and up to date in the modern world, to be popular, unchallenged, and never seen for what it truly is, it would need to be described or camouflaged or disguised as a democracy. So he says the perfect dictatorship is not communism, not the Soviet Union, not Cuba, but Mexico, because it's a camouflage dictatorship, he argues. It may not seem to be a dictatorship, but it has all the characteristics of a dictatorship. The perpetuation not of one person, but of an irrevocable party. A party that allows sufficient space for criticism, provided that such criticism serves to maintain the appearance of a democratic party, but which suppresses, by all means, including the worst, whatever criticism may threaten its perpetuation in power. In the article found in The Economist, Llosa was referring to the decades of rule by the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or the PRI, in keeping with its Orwellian name, had co-opted most of the country's institutions, including businesses, the unions, peasants, intellectuals, and the media. We mentioned in part one that the controlling interests of the Round Table group shifted from Cecil Rhodes's idea of empire based in Britain to the Rockefeller group, and the idea of world dominance structured on the concept of the New World Order based in New York ran through the United Nations. Every once in a while, we get a gift straight from the conspirators themselves.
What's this other jet doing? What's this other jet doing?
Another one just hit the building. Wow.
Oh my God. Oh God.
Total confusion.
Just get me somebody who has the authority to get military in the air now. I don't know where I'm scrambling these guys to. I need a direction, destination. We have no idea where he's going? No idea, sir.
737.
Hey, what?
The World Trade Center. Who are you talking to?
For the fighters. They're going direct to Washington.
We're not ready to die,
but it's getting bad. Oh, God! It's a new type of war. That's what it is.
Most people are unaware that, in the wake of 9/11, we secured the oil in the poppy fields, gaining control over the world's second largest oil reserves and controlling both the legal and illegal drug trade through opium procurement in Afghanistan.
Today, where over 90% of the world's heroin originates from the war-torn country. According to a report from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, this year saw opium production surge to a record high. The report said that the harvest this May resulted in 5,500 metric tons of opium, 49% higher than last year, and more than the combined output of the rest of the world. As reported by Global Research back in 2005, heroin is a multi-billion-dollar business supported by powerful interests, which requires a steady and secure commodity flow. One of the hidden objectives of the war was precisely to restore the CIA-sponsored drug trade to its historical levels and exert direct control over the drug routes. I guess we're also supposed to believe that this discovery of Afghanistan's $1 trillion worth of untapped minerals was a surprise coincidence. In today's globalized world, one can't discount the role that multinational corporations play in U.S. foreign policy decisions. Not only have oil companies and private military contractors made a killing off the occupation, Big Pharma, which collectively lobbies over $250 million annually to Congress, needs opium latex to manufacture drugs for this pill-happy nation. Don't forget about the banks. See, trillions in black market sales are being funneled through banks, and this money has got to come out clean on the other side.
We destabilized Iraq straight out of Odin Yannan's 1982 Zionist plan for the Middle East, based on the father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl. In a later policy document, A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm, and an even later policy document, The Project for a New American Century. But what typically goes unnoticed or under the radar is what was happening within the United States. That's where the real war was being fought. That's where the real nation rebuilding was taking place. Two things were happening. The first, the United States itself was being raped and pillaged by these exact same roundtable groups, their sub-organizations, think tanks, and more powerful NGOs, and affiliate corporations in the military and surveillance industrial complex by having frontmen working at the highest levels of state.
A relationship that Cheney concealed during his congressional career.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time.
And receiving private contracts to their corporations.
It is reportedly not a coincidence that Vice President Dick Cheney's old company got a huge contract to help rebuild Iraq. Time magazine said it has gotten a hold of a Pentagon email saying Cheney's office coordinated Halliburton's multi-billion-dollar deal.
When the vice president is your former CEO, you're going to get the access that other people don't.
Halliburton got the government contract without competitive bidding.
In the case of Halliburton, most of the contracts they've received have been sole source contracts, which means they're either given the contract, it's just offered to them, or they're the only people that bid on it.
Bunentine Greenhouse, a top contracting officer at the Army Corps of Engineers, alleges favoritism and rule breaking.
I walked into a process that was corrupt, that was geared toward preferential treatment to KBR. KBR was pre-selected. The duration of the contract was predetermined. Most blatant abuse that I had experienced in my contracting career.
Just phenomenal. I mean, of course there were insider deals. Of course it was payback for old friends and political supporters and campaign contributors.
The U.S. Army announced today it signed a new contract with a unit of the huge contracting firm Halliburton.
Halliburton's stock has quadrupled in value since the war began, and taxpayers are being ripped off.
By the U.S. involvement in the phony war on terror, costing thousands of American lives, not to mention over $1 trillion price tag. Privileged fat cat insiders not only advancing the fake war on terror narrative, but stood to gain personally and financially from the fallout. Sounds like what's happening today. Secondly, the technological and legal infrastructure was being laid and expanded for full spectrum dominance, which at that time was being implemented by the false flag 9/11 attacks, but today, under the guise of a pandemic, using medical martial law measures. Since 9/11, the U.S. government has been building a huge security anti-terror apparatus.
Since 9/11, the government has been building a huge anti-terror apparatus.
What happens after 9/11 is this tremendous ramping up.
The money just came out of Congress, goes flying out.
Bush basically provides a blank check to his counterterrorism team.
President Bush said to us in the basement of the White House on the night of 9/11, you have everything you need. They said, just tell us what you need. Blank check.
In the first few days after 9/11, the blueprint for what would take place over the next decade would be laid entirely in secrecy.
All in secret. The public didn't know, the media didn't know, and it would take us years to find out. In the beginning, we saw a little bit of this world everywhere, and we were gathering bit by bit.
It's going to be vital for us to use any means at our disposal to achieve our objective.
It really took years to figure out how big it really was, and we were shocked.
The 9/11 event provides a window of opportunity to see how these secret organizations work within nations and provide us a glimpse of the personalities, the patterns and predictabilities of those that are involved. It provides us a template we can use to identify roundtable group socialist shenanigans, centralizing even more power into the hands of the state.
They just wanted no information out. I think the reality is that they wanted to keep it secret because they were doing things that a lot of people would not approve of. And they wanted to do them as long as they could without being found out.
They're looking to expand executive power. 9/11 comes, and it is a state of emergency. And a state of emergency gives a host of people in the administration at the top a chance to try some things that they've been thinking about trying for a long time.
There would be new laws enhancing executive power, robust action at home and abroad, and above all, secrecy.
Which, now under the COVID hoax era, your own body, the ultimate private property, now belongs indirectly to the state. Cyrus the phony virus is also about the perpetuation of climate change and global warming.
COVID-19 is, in fact, this may surprise you, COVID-19 is really about global warming. As he puts it, quote, the COVID-19 pandemic has given new impetus to the need to accelerate efforts to respond to climate change. Bet you didn't see that coming.
Soon you hear all the rhetoric about, how the environment was able to rest, how we got rid of pollution and CO2 emissions were down, decreasing our carbon footprint across the globe.
For Dr. Tedros and Bill Gates, pandemic and climate change share a very different connection. Both are useful pretexts for mass social control. Both are essentially unsolvable crises they can harness to bypass democracy and force powerless populations to obey their commands.
All the hallmark talking points from the Club of Rome, which before 1976, according to Forbes, they tell us that it was first called global cooling. A good article on this is by Forbes. I think it's still on the website, where it's called In Their Own Words, Climate Alarmists Debunk Their Science. It's by Larry Bell, who writes in aerospace and environment and energy topics. And John Coleman, the co-founder of the Weather Channel.
Very difficult for anybody to be against it because the media has told the nation over and over again, day after day, for 20 years, that the oceans are rising, the polar bears are dying, the sea, the ice is melting, that storms are going to sweep the earth, and that we're all going to die of a heat wave. I mean, this is an incredible, bad science.
This might shock you. A man who co-founded the Weather Channel thinks climate change is a hoax. His name is John Coleman. His recent open letter saying that climate change is, quote, not valid, got a lot of attention and landed him in prime time on Fox News. Thank you for being here.
It's nice to be on CNN. Hello to all your viewers. I resent you calling me a denier. That is a word meant to put me down. I'm a skeptic about climate change, And I want to make it darn clear, Mr. Kenny's not a scientist. I am. He's the CEO of the Weather Channel now. I was the founder of the Weather Channel, not the co-founder.
And I'm glad you did, because I am addicted to the Weather Channel. I watch a lot of cable news.
Now, hold on just a minute. I'm not done. And CNN has taken a very strong position on global warming that it is a consensus. Well, there is no consensus in science. Science isn't a vote. Science is about facts. And if you get down to the hard, cold facts, there's no question about it. Climate change is not happening. There is no significant man-made global warming now. There hasn't been any in the past, and there's no reason to expect any in the future. There's a whole lot of baloney.
When you see NASA, when you see other institutions say that 97% of climate scientists agree, do you think they're making it up? What I don't understand is how you square that.
Well, that's a manipulated figure, and let me explain it to you. The government puts out about $2.5 billion directly for climate research every year. It only gives that money to scientists who will produce scientific results that support the global warming hypothesis of the Democrat Party position. So they don't have any choice. If you're going to get the money, you got to support their position. Therefore, 97% of the scientific reports published support global warming. Why? Because those are the ones the government pays for, and that's where the money is. It's real simple. But that doesn't mean it's right. That doesn't make it true. That only makes it bought and paid for. The money goes in circles.
I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to try to refute you on the facts.
That's the truth.
I'll simply say that the vast majority...
Please stand back from this issue and let the two sides be on the air. There are 31,000 scientists who have signed a petition that says it is not valid, that my position is correct.
Dennis Rancourt, a PhD former physics professor, also shares this view.
I just want to see, how many of you have an idea what the surface temperature is? So 2 people. See, here we are, we're 3 people. The first point I want to make is we're all being bombarded with global warming and how terrible it is. And none of us know what the average surface temperature of the Earth is. Good God, you'd think that the CBC would once in a while tell you what that is, right? They don't. And they don't tell you what it means if they give you a number.
That, as independent science has now confirmed, that the globe is actually cooling and has been cooling since 2002, broadly flat since 1998. We're all talking about something here which isn't happening. I've heard time and time again members here talk of CO2 as a pollutant. A pollutant is a life-giving natural gas. It gives me the impression that some of our members haven't had the benefit of a formal education. Isn't this really just about the state being able to get its hand in ordinary people's trouser pocket to steal yet more tax from them? Isn't this all about political control? Isn't all this about politics and big business? The whole thing's a sham. This bogus hypothesis, this ridiculous nonsense that man-made CO2 is causing global warming. Enough, please, before we damage irrevocably the global economy.
Counter-narrative voices are often ignored, just like 9/11 and the fake weapons of mass destruction fear porn propagated over the population. Weapons inspectors going on the record speaking out against the official narrative that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and links to Al-Qaeda. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, says,
realistically speaking, no. Iraq has been disarmed fundamentally. Their weapons programs have been eliminated. And if we got weapons inspectors back in, you can ensure that these weapons programs would not be reconstituted. Iraq has no capability today to project meaningful military power outside of its borders. Iraq poses no threat to any of its neighbors. It does not threaten its region. It does not threaten the United States. It does not threaten the world.
Listen to Colin Powell in February 2001. He states clearly that there was no threat from Saddam Hussein.
He has not developed any significant capability with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He is unable to project conventional power against his neighbors.
And this is Condoleezza Rice, Bush's national security advisor, in July of the same year, saying the same thing, putting the lie to their own propaganda.
We are able to keep arms from him. His military forces have not been rebuilt.
September 11th gave them the opportunity to put in play plans that they had been considering since the first Bush administration.
The attack on Iraq was brought up from almost the first days, even though there was no evidence whatever that the Iraqis had been involved in this.
The president dragged me into a room with a couple of other people, shut the door, and said, I want you to find whether Iraq did this. That George Bush wanted me to come back with a report that said Iraq did this.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you gotta come in. You gotta come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
We've never finished the investigation of 9/11 and whether the administration actually misused the intelligence information it had. The evidence seems pretty clear to me.
Without any evidence linking Saddam Hussein to the attacks of 9/11, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was already ordering his aides to draw up plans for striking Iraq.
Plans that already existed for regime change in Iraq had to be justified. They couldn't just go in without public support. The public support was created by connecting Saddam Hussein to those fears of terrorism. The fear generated by 9/11, the fear of terrorist networks, has to be transferred to Iraq. That is, the American people have to learn to be as afraid of Saddam Hussein as they are of Osama bin Laden.
Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld set up a small intelligence office in the Pentagon, the Office of Special Plans, to create the rationales for the already planned attack on Iraq, to convince people that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction and that he was linked to Al-Qaeda and 9/11.
You could find bits and pieces of fact throughout, but framed, articulated, crafted to convince someone of what? Well, of things that weren't true. Things that weren't true. The very things that a year later, President Bush himself denies and feigns his surprise. I don't know why everybody thinks that.
We've had no evidence that Saddam Hussein was involved with the September the 11th. We've had no evidence that Saddam Hussein was involved with the September the 11th. We've had no evidence that Saddam Hussein was involved with the September the 11th.
Well, I worked in a place where they concentrated on preparing this storyline and selling it to everyone that they could possibly sell it to.
It wasn't a failure of intelligence, it was the manipulation of intelligence to achieve a political goal. They were disciplined, they stayed on message, they marshaled all of their forces in this relentless public relations campaign to convince the American people that there was a threat from Iraq.
It's day 4 of the Bush team's full court press, giving speech after speech after speech, and issuing reports.
The United States knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Any country on the face of the earth with an active intelligence program knows that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
The one choice we don't have is to do nothing. As the President has said, and as Prime Minister Blair said yesterday, doing nothing is no longer an option.
He has aggressively sought to acquire
chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons.
Who is continuing to develop weapons of mass destruction, has not disarmed. They were within 6 months to a year of having a nuclear weapon.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein's regime is a danger to the United States.
These things were not based on intelligence that we saw, that everyone saw. They were based on a very selective reading of the intelligence and then a creative packaging such that you could push through these two big points that the president and the vice president and the whole neoconservative community used to justify this preemptive war on Iraq.
Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001.
Their policy depends on deception and secrecy. Like every imperial policy in history, even dictatorships have taken great efforts always to disguise what they're doing and why they're doing it to their own people.
The Bush administration knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and yet they continued to use the inspection process
that allowed the administration to frame an invasion of Iraq as a non-aggressive, justified act of self-defense under international law, rather than an offensive action designed to extend U.S. empire.
Robert Jackson, the justice from the U.S. Supreme Court who went to Nuremberg in 1945, made it very clear that the Nazi leaders were being put on trial not because they lost, but because they launched an aggressive war. And he described it as a crime against humanity that had no possible justification.
Contrary to the lies told to the American people, Iraq had absolutely no connections with 9/11. Al-Qaeda was despised by the regime in Iraq, which was a secular regime, not interested in religion as such, but they still wanted to go for it. And so they delayed it. They went into Afghanistan first, and then they decided to go for Iraq.
For Iraq to have meaningful weapons of mass destruction capacity today, it would have had to reconstitute significant aspects of those programs which we eliminated. And that reconstitution is detectable by the intelligence services of the United States and other nations.
When talking about the current Cyrus the phony virus crisis, people give you the same lame excuse to virtue signal and stand on their fictitious moral high ground by saying, I don't want to risk it. It's the same response that Colin Powell gave in a response to Scott Ritter's denial of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction.
The rhetoric of fear that is disseminated by my government and others has not to date been backed up by hard facts that substantiate any allegations that Iraq is today in possession of weapons of mass destruction or has links to terror groups responsible for attacking the United States.
And Scott is certainly entitled to his opinion, but...
And Powell began to virtue signal by placing his hand over his heart in reverence to the fictitious potential loss of lives due to non-action.
I'm afraid that I would not place the security of my nation and the security of our friends in the region on that kind of an assertion. Doing nothing is no longer an option.
And then they go on to make further unsubstantiated claims like, do you remember the cave fortresses in Afghanistan?
There was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of the side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress.
Yes.
A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. Cut deep to avoid thermal detection. A ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks. Even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business.
Real serious. 100% serious. Like, seriously made up.
I met Rockefeller through a female attorney I knew. He's the one who told me 11 months before 9/11 ever happened that there was going to be an event. And I remember he was telling me how you're going to see soldiers looking in caves for people in Afghanistan and Pakistan and all these places.
This is a fortress.
Yes.
A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
He told me that you're going to see men running around caves looking for Osama bin Laden. you're going to see men looking for, these guys, and they're going to be,
They told you it was all going to be bull.
It's a phony. The whole thing is a fake. It's a fraud.
Was he laughing, or was he just coldly saying this?
No, it's more laughing. Cynical. Laughing. It's more like, look how stupid everybody is. Look how stupid everybody. We can do whatever we want to do. What about bin Laden being in the American hospital, getting kidney help?
Yeah.
Right? In the American hospital, right? They could, if they wanted Osama bin Laden, they could have gotten him.
Oh, yeah.
He was right in the American, after the Cole. We're dealing with complete evil. We're dealing with complete evil.
Do you remember the mobile biological and chemical weapons labs in Iraq?
Mobile production facilities used to make biological agents. We have diagrammed what our sources reported about these mobile facilities. Here you see both truck and rail car mounted mobile factories. As these drawings, based on their description, show, we know what the fermenters look like. We know what the tanks, pumps, compressors, and other parts look like. We know how they fit together. We know how they work. And we know a great deal about the platforms on which they are mounted.
It just goes to show you the link that they'll go to make a lie seem real and authentic.
We have no evidence of Iraq ever having laboratories on the back of trucks. I investigated both of these for over 5 years, and I took in teams equipped with sophisticated ground-penetrating radar. We not only didn't find buried facilities, we found out that most of Iraq is not conducive to underground facilities, so I don't know where these facilities are that Donald Rumsfeld speaks of.
Powell himself at the United Nations, the one place where you want to go if you're going to lie to the world and tell half-truths about intelligence, blatantly lies about Iraq's WMDs, with CIA Director George Tenet sitting right behind him, knowing that what Powell is communicating to the international community is 100% nonsense. Just like the people accepted the lies as truth then.
So successful was the propaganda campaign that by 2003, polls were showing that the vast majority of Americans believed the unfounded claims that Saddam Hussein was linked to 9/11 and that he possessed stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction.
In this case, I was saying we've been lied into this as blatantly as we were lied into Vietnam. This was a purely aggressive, illegal crime against the peace.
These guys should be brought up in charges. There should be an investigation about whether these guys should be allowed to serve our country anymore. Because to me, it's criminal to say we're going to send our troops to war based on falsified intelligence, based on puffed up, exaggerated details.
People are accepting the lies as truth now. COVID is the new 9/11 terrorist boogeyman, allowing the roundtable groups to merge total surveillance with biosecurity. After 9/11, the rhetoric was, trust the intelligence. And though the intelligence was provably wrong, they knowingly repeated it at the highest levels of government to convince the American people that we needed a war with Iraq. Dissenting voices were not heard. At worst, at best, they were outright dismissed. Years later, and trillions of dollars spent on the farce known as the War on Terror, it's still raging. Just like what's going to happen with Cyrus the phony virus, as Carlson notes.
A vaccine, even if we get one, will not be the end of all of this. It will never end.
The rhetoric now is just trust the science. The same with global warming, climate change. It's the same mantra that's being repeated over and over again at the highest levels of government, just like trust the intelligence was repeated for the war on terror, just like trust the plan is repeated in the conspiracy circles, just like trust the science is repeated ad nauseum in relation to COVID.
I have one thing to say.
Hi, COVID.
Hello.
Tell us about your head-to-toe look.
As soon as she walked out, I thought, oh, she's sick. But like sick in a good way. It's sick. The outfit is sick.
I loved COVID's look. Thank you. Do you mind putting your mask back on?
And the mainstream media, any dissenting voices are at best dismissed. At worst, they're now silenced. For COVID.
Hi, COVID.
Hello.
It doesn't matter that after over a year of lockdowns, mask wearing, social distancing, and now vaccinations worldwide, that the Chinese finally confirm that they still have not isolated the virus.
Where Chinese officials took samples over a year ago.
And why has the data not been shared?
No, they didn't isolate the virus. No, they didn't isolate the virus. No, they didn't isolate the virus. That's the issue.
What about live animal samples?
It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you anything.
That the biggest fraud against this humanity, our humanity, is the fact that viruses have never been isolated. None. There is no measles virus. And once you understand the basic chemistry and biology of the fraud that they've perpetuated on the human race, and each year, if you ever thought about this, why is there a new virus every year? With a new name? With a similar types of symptomologies? This all started with the Third Reich. And Dr. Enders and the so-called viruses. I write about this in one of my books. A Second Thought About Viruses, Vaccines, and the HIV/AIDS Hypothesis. And I'm not alone. Those who have been brave enough, who stood up, even Peter Duesberg, Professor Peter Duesberg at Berkeley University, a friend of mine, who wrote the book Inventing the AIDS Virus, lost all of his funding at the university. When the Nobel Prize winner for discovering the so-called HIV virus gets exiled to Beijing because he's changing his mind about the existence of a virus. This is how bad things are.
Something about this whole coronavirus thing, if you want me to. So, in 1918, after the biggest pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, Steiner was asked, what was this all about? And he said, well, viruses are simply excretions of a toxic cell. Viruses are pieces of DNA or RNA with a few other proteins. They bud out from the cell. They happen when the cell is poisoned. They are not the cause of anything. And the first way I would encourage you to think about this is if you are a famous dolphin doctor, right? And you have been studying dolphins in the Arctic Circle for hundreds of years, or at least a long time, and the dolphins were fine. And then they call you up, Fred, all the dolphins or a lot of the dolphins are dying in the Arctic Circle, can you come and investigate, right? And you have one question to ask. So, show of hands, how many of you would say, I want to investigate a dolphin to see the genetic makeup of that dolphin? Nobody, because that's stupid. How many of you would say, I want to see if this dolphin and that dolphin has a virus because it might be contagious and that's why all these dolphins are getting sick? That fellow. How many of you would say, excuse my French here, somebody put some shit in the water here? Like Exxon Valdez? Anybody? Everybody. Because that's what happened. And the cells get poisoned. They try to purify themselves by excreting debris, which we call viruses. If you go to the current theory of viruses called exosomes, and the latest head of the NIH giving a talk on the complexity of viruses, you will see this is perfectly in line with the current thinking on what a virus really is.
You are actually questioning whether or not COVID-19 exists at all. Am I correct about that, or please clarify your position?
Yeah, thank you. That's pretty close. So I just want to separate the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is what they've named what they call as a virus, and COVID-19 being the illness. Okay. So I actually reject both hypotheses. I went and looked at the papers that had claimed to isolate this virus, and there are essentially 4 papers. And when I read these, I read them very closely, and I had to, do some investigation because they use kind of a lot of language that's difficult to understand unless you're publishing in this field. So it took me a bit to parse out exactly what they did, but what I found out is that they never isolated or purified a virus. So what I mean is, in order to identify a virus, it's basically a particle, right, that has a membrane and inside of it some genetic material and a few proteins throughout. And so in order to identify that, what you would do is that you would basically purify it from a sick person, from the diseased part of their body. In this case, they took samples from lung fluid because the people that they identified as having this illness had respiratory symptoms. But they never actually purified any viral particles out of that lung fluid or out of their tissue culture experiments later on. Instead, what they did is they amplified a piece of genetic material that had a part of its sequence that they were specifically looking for because they had pre-identified these sequences as being from viruses. And they just basically identified a snippet of this genetic material and said that this was a virus. And they did really nothing more. So there was never a particle that was purified from which they would extract genetic material and say, this RNA came from this particle, therefore it belongs to the particle and it makes up a basically genome of a virus. If they wanted to go a step further and prove that such a virus would cause an illness, what they would have to do is then put that virus particle in a healthy host and then show that that host develops the same disease, and those are called Koch's postulates. And that's basically the common sense rules which the germ theory scientists originally formulated themselves to prove if a germ or pathogen causes an illness. And this was never done either. And this has far-reaching implications because the test, the main test that's been used, the RT-PCR test that I'm sure you've talked about at length, is based on this little piece of RNA that we don't know where it comes from, because it came from this lung fluid, which has many, many things in it, many sources of RNA, DNA, many different kinds of cells, including human and microbial. And we also know that many what they call viral sequences have been found in our own cells and particles that our own cells make, known as exosomes, in the past. So it could very well be that this RNA is from our own cells, from exosomes, or it could be from another microbial source. We just have no idea of telling where it was because they never found the particle that it came from and took it from that particle. And there's a new article that came out written by Torsten Engelbrecht where he actually emailed the authors of these 4 papers and asked them directly, did you show any evidence of a purified virus? And all 4 of them answered that they did not purify any viral particles. So they're essentially admitting that they don't know the origin of the genetic material.
Is there a reason why they would skip what seems like an obvious step to make sure we knew what we were talking about?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Del, and this is why it's so important, is because all of these measures that have been taken are based on this scientific assumption that has not been proven. So they would actually be able to do this as long as there were an actual viral particle that they could find.
Let me just then be clear. Are you saying that there is no virus out there that is sweeping the nation right now? Or are you saying that this is simply like every other coronavirus every year, or maybe the identical coronavirus, they're just making something, new about something old? What is your, exact perspective on what is making people sick?
Yeah, well, I think that's a question that we need to answer separately, and there may be a different answer depending on the geographic location and exactly what has happened. But what I am saying for sure is that there is not one scientist who has isolated or purified a virus and made a concrete association with a new illness. So there's no science that proves that, or anywhere even close to proving that.
It doesn't matter that Kary Mullis, inventor of PCR, says that the test is useless when used to determine infectious disease.
Those tests are all based on things that are invisible, and the results are inferred in a sense. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what it is. But it's not. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that.
The reason they're using this test is to manipulate us. Let me tell you about this so-called PCR test. It stands for polymerase chain reaction. This test, as discussed many times by its inventor, Kary Mullis, is not suited to diagnose an illness or prove the cause of a disease.
If they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful.
It is a research and manufacturing tool. Yes, manufacturing DNA or RNA sequences. In this situation, it's manufacturing a fake disease. So what this test actually does is make a lot of something out of a little of that something. That's it. It takes a short sequence of DNA or RNA and replicates it over and over. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack by making that one needle magically turn into 100 million needles. Certainly, you would be able to see that many. One problem is, however, that when you amplify those needles, you also amplify twigs, spider webs, lint, pebbles, dust, ants, hair, and anything else that's close to size of the needle. So when you see the thing in large quantities, are you seeing the needles or are you seeing pebbles and twigs? According to Dr. Fauci in the United States, if you amplify more than 35 cycle threshold, then all your results are twigs and pebbles.
If you get a cycle threshold of 35 or more, that the chances of it being replication competent are minuscule. You almost never can culture virus from a 37 threshold cycle. So I think if somebody does come in with 37, 38, even 36, you got to say, it's just dead nucleotides, period.
But that is exactly what they're doing in many countries, like in England, where they're using a whopping 45 cycles. All their results are junk.
This has opened the door. The Portuguese study, right? The PCR tests, 97% false positive. Translate that into English, they're bullshit. Sorry about the swearing. I'm sorry, Mum. This is from the editor of the British Medical Journal. COVID-19 has unleashed state corruption on a grand scale. It's not a conspiracy, it's in the British Medical Journal. England closed down, it locked down on the 23rd of March. On the 13th of March, the UK government decided COVID-19 was no longer a high-consequence infectious disease. That means that our Prime Minister, when he stood in front of the country and said it was the biggest danger facing our society ever, was lying. On the 19th of March, this was on their own website, saying it's not dangerous, saying the mortality rate is low overall.
That actually the great majority of people will not die from this. And I'll just repeat something I said right at the beginning, because I think it's worth reinforcing. Even the very highest groups, if they catch this virus, will not die.
But there's more. The particular RNA sequences this test looks at are based upon a theoretical model of a theoretical virus's genes. It uses short sequences called primers to find the target of a so-called virus. A group of researchers in Spain recently searched these primers in a special database open to the public called BLAST and found that they are identical not only to several different human sequences, but also to as many as 100 different bacteria. That means that almost anything, like a fruit, a puddle of water, a sheep, or another animal could test positive, and in fact, they all have. Since bacteria are ubiquitous, virtually anything could be positive for this PCR test. But based on this fraudulent and worthless test, your rights have been compromised. The more testing that is done, the worse it has gotten and will get. You must resist and say no to the swab. Do not get tested or allow your children or family to get tested. They control the game through testing. If they set the cycles high, the number of positives will be high. Then they will order more lockdowns and other tyrannical policies.
And that the current medical administration teams that are in charge, according to Mullis, are incompetent.
Guys like Fauci get up there and start talking, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and he should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on at the bottom. Those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to, and they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera.
It doesn't matter that when the cameras are off, the masks come off.
Those demographics, no matter where they are, citing how important that is. She also touched on Lollapalooza, no decision on that.
It was time to open up, but you can see, here, just around. Nobody's wearing them, nobody's, the cameraman. There you go, including the cameraman. Yeah. Katie?
Side by side, not wearing facial coverings. Now, some said they were doing so to make a point.
Well, obviously, you see the lady behind the camera. She chose not to wear the mask. She's portraying it like she needs to wear a mask, and these people aren't wearing a mask, but you're not wearing a mask either behind the camera.
Clearly not what the CDC director thinks, since he said today that masks are an important, powerful public health tool we have. They could be even more protective against COVID than a vaccine. So have any medical experts told the president that masks aren't good?
Yeah, get ready for the next event, everybody.
If everyone could please practice social distancing if the cameras are on.
It doesn't matter if you point out that they show you the exact same hospital footage, claiming that they're being overrun. And it's actually the same footage from the same hospital, but with different graphic overlays.
This is the main hospital in Bergamo. This is the main hospital in Bergamo.
After all, it's just political theater anyway.
So Wendy, I'm going to take my mask off when I speak.
I will as well. I'm waiting so that we can do a little political theater. Okay. So that it's on camera.
It doesn't matter that they don't read their own notes, but just repeat what they're told.
I don't know why I bring all these papers. I never look at them.
Oh, when you're giving numbers, I do. I go, oh. I said that. Did you really say that?
I just say whatever they write down for me.
That's why I don't got things.
It doesn't matter that they fake vaccinations live on television. It doesn't matter that hospitals have become soul-train dance auditions.
buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami ngishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami.
It doesn't matter that they openly call what they're doing the New World Order.
This is a world pandemic. It's a 1 in 100 year event. So you can expect that we will have transmission from time to time, and that's just the way it is. We've got to accept that this is the New World Order. We've got to accept that this is the New World Order. The New World Order. The New World Order. The New World Order.
You're obviously seeing this collision coming a mile away between the United States and China. This is going to define the next 100 years. There's going to be a new world order after this virus. There's going to be a new world order after this virus. There's going to be a new world order after this virus.
It doesn't matter that they first told you that the lockdowns, the mask wearing, the social distancing, and all the bootlicking were just until we got a vaccine.
Everything will be fine once we can vaccinate against COVID-19. Many in authority told us that. They're still telling us that.
And then they switched yet again, saying that the vaccines don't provide protection.
We're not sure at this point that the vaccine protects you against getting infected.
What we know the vaccine does is it prevents symptomatic disease. What we don't know if it does or not is to prevent infection.
They don't stop transmission. They don't even stop you from getting infected again.
So just because you're protected, so-called protected by the vaccine, you need to remember that you could be prevented from getting clinical disease and still have the virus that is in your nasopharynx because you could get infected. We're not sure at this point that the vaccine protects you against getting infected.
Welcome, I'm Bismita Gupta-Smith, and this is WHO's Conversations in Science. Kate, after one has been vaccinated, can one still catch COVID-19, and can one also infect others?
What we don't know yet from the clinical trials is whether or not the vaccines also protect people from just getting infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and whether or not it protects against transmitting to somebody else.
But once we get a corona vaccine, they're telling us all will be well. But now they've changed that. Not true anymore. According to a new announcement from the World Health Organization, a vaccine, even if we get one, will not be the end of all of this. It will never end.
A vaccine on its own will not end the pandemic. Surveillance will need to continue. People will still need to be tested, isolated, and cared for. Contacts will still need to be traced and quarantined.
Doesn't seem to do anything, really. Kind of like masks.
Anthony Fauci, the Surgeon General, said, people, stop buying masks. They don't work to block the coronavirus.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
Which are mostly symbolic.
Wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet. But it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
We know what works. These don't work against viruses. Regular masks don't work. That's simply what it is. It's been shown many times. It's nothing to do with COVID. COVID doesn't even factor into the equation because for years we've been looking at these issues.
We've been studying this issue for over 30 years with regards to the transmission of influenza in the population. One of the reasons that we have never recommended the community wearing of medical masks is because it's been shown in the highest levels of science, randomized controlled trials, meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, to not be effective. That hand washing, social distancing, masks add almost nothing to that equation. So it has a very marginal, at best, efficacy, and those studies are in healthcare workers and hospital settings in which we have an optimal environment with high air exchange, low temperatures, nothing like what our community is encountering.
N95 blocks, let's say, 5%, only 5% of airborne particles can get through, but all viruses can get through.
In February and March, we were told not to wear masks. What changed? The science didn't change, the politics did. This is about compliance, it's not about science.
The reason we wear masks and the reason I wear a mask, because the fear is so massive in this country.
See, I think there are two ways in which people are controlled. First of all, frighten people, and secondly, demoralize them. An educated, healthy, and confident nation is harder to govern. And I think there's an element in the thinking of some people. We don't want people to be educated, healthy, and confident because they would get out of control.
I'll wear a mask so people don't think I don't care about them.
But if you double them up, it's just common sense that they provide more protection.
If you have a physical covering with one layer, you put another layer on, it just makes common sense that it likely would be more effective.
So experts say you can double up with a tight weave fabric mask for added protection.
Citing studies.
Virginia Tech researchers found that doubling up these cloth masks increases the efficacy from 50 to 75%. A 3-layer mask could block up to 90% of the particles.
And then they tell you that there is no data backing up wearing double masks.
Maybe I should put 2 masks on. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's no data that indicates that that is going to make a difference.
Guys like Fauci get up there and start talking, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Tony Fauci does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on the bottom. Those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to.
It doesn't matter if they tell you, that forced internment camps are a conspiracy theory.
I was chatting with a group of students the other day, and a young woman asked me about COVID internment camps, and I had to explain that as we consume increasing amounts and various sources of information online and around us, we need to continue to be attentive to source. We need to continue to be attentive to comparing various reports and looking for trusted sources.
Then 3 months later, they tell you that, they're going to enforce mandatory quarantine for people who test negative. And for the people that test positive, there's government facilities where they're to be quarantined.
We will be introducing mandatory PCR testing at the airport for people returning to Canada. Travelers will then have to wait for up to 3 days at an approved hotel for their test results at their own expense, which is expected to be more than $2,000. Those with negative test results will then be able to quarantine at home under significantly increased surveillance and enforcement. Significantly increased surveillance and enforcement. Significantly increased surveillance and enforcement. Those with positive tests will be immediately required to quarantine in designated government facilities, in designated government facilities, in designated government facilities to make sure they're not carrying variants of potential concern.
Listen to a member of the Canadian Parliament explain what they're like.
The Liberals instituted a federal hotel quarantine requirement for those entering Canada. We have heard reports that it is taking hours to get through to book these hotels, dietary restrictions are not being met, and food and water is not always readily available. That's in addition to this program continuing after reports of sexual assault.
Fail a COVID test and they will lock you up without trial and go ahead and try to disobey. According to the Canadian government, anyone who attempts to avoid these rules, detention in a government internment facility, for example, could face $1 million fine and 3 years in prison.
The Kiwis have a terrifying new response to rising COVID case numbers. They're throwing people into quarantine camps. Quarantine camps. Quarantine camps.
If someone refuses in our facilities to be tested, they have to keep staying. So they won't be able to leave after 14 days. They have to stay on for another 14 days. So it's a pretty good incentive. You either get your tests done and make sure you're cleared, or we will keep you in a facility longer. You either get your tests done and make sure you're cleared, or we will keep you in a facility longer. You either get your tests done and make sure you're cleared, or we will keep you in a facility longer. So I think most people will look at that and say, I'll take the test.
No leaving the camp until you're negative.
If there are people who are non-compliant, there are definitely laws and public health powers that can quarantine people in mandatory settings. It's potential you could track people, put bracelets on their arms, have police and other setups to ensure quarantine is undertaken.
Police checkpoints are set up on all the bridges, and everyone leaving the city is required to show proof of vaccination. Those who refuse to cooperate are taken away to temporary detention centers.
And we need to make it clear to them that the vaccine is the ticket back to pre-pandemic life. We have a very narrow window to tie reopening policy to vaccination status. Because otherwise, if everything is reopened, then what's the carrot going to be? How are we going to incentivize people to actually get the vaccine? So that's why I think the CDC and the Biden administration needs to come out a lot bolder and say, if you're vaccinated, you can do all these things. Here are all these freedoms that you have. Because otherwise, people are going to go out and enjoy these freedoms anyway.
We're in a global crisis. We have to reach herd immunity. And the carrot and stick of you get the vaccine, you'll be able to participate in travel, restaurants, you name it, because that's frankly easier for small businesses to adhere to.
It doesn't matter that coronavirus vaccines historically have an alleged terrible safety record.
Okay. Historically, vaccines for coronaviruses have had a terrible safety record. There is a condition known as disease enhancement due to pathogenic priming. Prior to the development of any COVID vaccines, I found that all but one of the proteins in the SARS-CoV-2 virus have what we call unsafe epitopes, right? Which are parts of proteins that are capable of causing immune conditions, autoimmune conditions, and immune responses against proteins in our own body. This is peer-reviewed research, and I'll be happy to provide the press with a reference after this.
For almost 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has been trying to develop corona vaccines, but never managed, because they saw in the animal trials that there were serious side effects, autoimmune disorders, when the animal was exposed to a new wild-type virus. These autoimmune disorders are comparable with the complications we have seen in some COVID-19 patients. Now, due to the excuse of a global pandemic, the pharma industry has the permission to skip the animal trials. This means that we humans will be the guinea pigs, and we might get severe side effects.
It doesn't matter that masks are not advised by health officials.
If you do not have any respiratory symptoms such as fever, cough, or runny nose, you do not need to wear a medical mask. You do not need to wear a medical mask. You do not need to wear a medical mask, like this one, like this one, like this one. Mask alone can give you a false feeling of protection and can even be a source of infection when not used correctly.
The CDC published a study reviewing all the data on influenza virus, which is a virus that has similar size to this virus. In May 2020, the CDC has that posted where all the data on masks showed that it does not stop the spread of a viral infection. So there's no evidence that a mask mandate has worked. And in fact, there is evidence, as Jay cited, that the people in the United States at a very high frequency have been wearing masks for months, and the cases exploded, whether it's in certain states like Hawaii, Minnesota, you could look at all the data. So this has sort of become folklore, one of the many obsessions. And, it's been harmful, not just from the increased risk to elderly people. Those statements that were made that a mask is better than a vaccine was extraordinarily inappropriate and reckless, and it endangered people.
Masks have not, I think I heard the CDC, the former CDC director say that masks were more effective than vaccines. Well, I think the evidence just belies that. That's not true. That was not true then. It was not true now. I think masks, in fact, in some ways they've been harmful because people believe that masks protect them, vulnerable people, and they end up taking more risk than they ought because they feel like they're protected by something that actually does not protect them. So I think, on net, I think the masks not only have not been effective, but have been harmful. The mandates themselves have created social division in ways that are just really to be regretted. I mean, public health is supposed to create some sorts of unity, not the kinds of division and moralization of behavior that it has created.
Here's how it works, Dr. Fauci. Right. I get to ask you the questions. You're the highest paid official in the United States government. You've given us your advice on baseball, on dating apps, on cruise ships. You told us 0 masks, 1 mask, 2 masks, now back to 1 mask. I'm just asking you, when is it going to end? You can say I'm ranting. I'm actually asking the question that the citizens I get the privilege of representing, and my name actually goes on a ballot. I don't think your name's ever been on a ballot. My name goes on a ballot. The citizens I represent want to know the answer to when they can get their liberties back. You can call that ranting. I actually call it standing up for the Constitution, which I take an oath to uphold, Dr. Fauci, every year, every term that I serve in this Congress representing the folks in the 4th District of Ohio. So it is not ranting. It is defending the First Amendment.
Badgering.
And we'd like an answer, or your best guess, since you got an answer for everything else.
You're telling everybody to wear a mask, whether they've had an infection or a vaccine. What I'm saying is they have immunity, and everybody agrees they have immunity. What studies do you have that people that have had the vaccine or have had the infection are spreading the infection? If we're not spreading the infection, isn't it just theater?
No, it's not.
The vaccine and you're wearing 2 masks. Isn't that theater?
No, that's not. Here we go again with the theater. Let's get down to the facts.
You've been vaccinated and you parade around in 2 masks for show.
No.
You can't get it again. There's virtually 0% chance you're going to get it, and yet you're telling people that have had the vaccine, who have immunity. You're defying everything we know about immunity by telling people to wear a mask who've been vaccinated. No. Instead, you should be saying there is no science to say we're going to have a problem from the large number of people being vaccinated. You want to get rid of vaccine hesitancy? Tell them they can quit wearing their mask after they get the vaccine. You want people to get the vaccine? Give them a reward instead of telling them that the nanny state's going to be there for 3 more years and you got to wear a mask forever. People don't want to hear it. There's no science behind it.
Well, let me just state for the record that masks are not theater. Masks are protective. And we
have immunity there, theater. If you already have immunity, you're wearing a mask to give comfort to others. You're not wearing a mask because of any science.
I totally disagree with you.
Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines, help all the people who have been quarantined. We'll wear our masks and we'll have to stay distant. We'll wash our hands and we'll be more resistant. Fauci, yes? Promise us, please. We'll have a cure that can fight off this disease. Restrictions will lift with some ease. Dr. Fauci, don't forget me.
And as that, I researched bioweapons and all sorts of stuff and masks. And I'm going to tell you, in my entire professional career, I've never heard anybody actually believe that any kind of masks, short of an actual level 4 containment suit, made a difference to small particle viruses. In fact, the CDC itself just published an article in May exactly saying that. You cannot contain influenza with these masks, and that's even larger than this virus. Now, I reviewed all this science. I gave a talk out in Nevada last month, and it's online, YouTube, Medical Technocracy in my name, and you can look at all the sciencey stuff. My conclusion, looking at all redoing my investigation into this time, is that people that are now purporting to scientifically prove masks work are either being paid or being played. This just doesn't work this way. And, the outcome of this is not going to be good.
We do not recommend face masks for general wearing. The evidence on face masks has always been quite variable, quite weak.
The evidence is weak and the effect is small.
Our advice is clear that wearing a mask if you don't have an infection really reduces the risk, almost not at all. So we do not advise that.
Masks should only be used by healthcare workers, caretakers, or by people who are sick with symptoms of fever and cough.
It doesn't matter if they admit that none of this is based on science, but rather upon modeling.
None of these are based on scientific evidence. There's some evidence in some modeling that Alberta has done.
It doesn't matter if doctors are speaking out by the droves.
We are doctors, scientists, and peace activists, and we are all saying together, this affair of COVID-19 is just not true.
I'm going to briefly outline my credentials so that you can understand where I'm coming from in terms of knowledge base in all of this. I'm a medical specialist in pathology, which includes virology. I trained at Cambridge University in the UK. I'm the ex-president of the pathology section of the Medical Association. I was previously an assistant professor in the Faculty of Medicine doing a lot of teaching. I was the chairman of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada Examination Committee in Pathology in Ottawa. But more to the point, I'm currently the chairman of a biotechnology company in North Carolina selling a COVID-19 test. And you might say I know a little bit about all of this. The bottom line is simply this. There is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public.
Hello, I'm Elke de Klerk from the Netherlands, and I want to state that we do not have a medical pandemic or epidemic. We also state that COVID-19 should not be on list A for any longer, because we now know that it is a normal flu virus, and the normal flu virus isn't on list A. So we are also starting a lawsuit to the state of the Netherlands to bring this in with a large group of doctors and a really large group of nurses also, because we have contact with 87,000 nurses that do not want the vaccine that is being prepared for us. I want to state, if there is no pandemic, I am wondering why our kids are in schools with masks. There's absolute constitutional rights, and they cannot be infringed or infringed for any medical reason.
My name is Andrew Kaufman. I'm a medical doctor and board-certified forensic psychiatrist. This pandemic is not a real medical pandemic. There has not been a virus that has been purified or shown to be the cause of an illness. Thus, there is no target for a vaccine. However, the bottom line is that since no additional deaths have occurred in relation to a new disease, there is simply no need for a new vaccine.
Hi, my name is Hilde de Smet. I'm a Belgian medical doctor, and I'd like to say that the new COVID-19 vaccine is not safe and that there is no global medical pandemic.
It's Nils Fosse. I'm a medical doctor in Bergen, Norway. This is not a real medical pandemic. The death rates in Norway are not higher than on an average year.
Doctors aren't allowed to question COVID-19 in public. Material containing the truth about the alleged disease and the vaccine is banned. In the last year, I've been demonized and lied about, and a 50-year career and reputation trashed by those promoting a pandemic that never was and a vaccine that was never needed. The whole COVID-19 scam is, as I said in March 2020, the greatest hoax in history.
My name is Dr. Johan Dennis from Belgium. The corona vaccine is not proven safe or effective. There is no medical emergency. It is a fake pandemic.
I'm Dr. Kevin Corbett, a retired registered nurse and health scientist in the United Kingdom. The COVID vaccines are not proven safe or effective. COVID is not a real medical epidemic.
My name is Heiko Santelmann. I'm a German medical doctor, now working in Norway. I have been working with the general practice for 40 years, doing research for 20 years, the last 10 years especially on vaccines. I have to shout out that this is not a real medical pandemic, and the COVID-19 vaccine is not proven to be safe or effective. I agree with the British Medical Journal that the testing is not done honestly. The claimed 90% effect is really only 0.2% if you study the results.
My name is Mikael Nordfors. I'm a medical doctor from Sweden, and I'm working with integrative medicine. And there is no pandemic, and the vaccine is neither safe nor effective. And to give an untested vaccine to entire humanity and use them as guinea pigs is complete madness and nothing else. And we must stop it now.
Creating their own committees and organizations to combat mainstream media broadcasting nonsense 24/7, 365.
We are here to announce the World Doctors Alliance under the roof of acu2020.org.
This is Dr. Mohammed Adel from United Kingdom. I am fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons of UK and consultant surgeon. I have been working for the National Health Services for the last 30 years with unblemished record. I am chairman of the Global Nectarian Organization, All Pakistan Medical Association UK, and recently we have developed World Doctors Alliance in collaboration with thousands of health professionals across the world.
To the mask believers who have been angry at people who won't wear a mask, I call on you now to double your anger, but direct your anger toward those people who have lied to you. It is the people who are angry who have the power to fix the social divisiveness. We need you to put your anger squarely where it belongs. Unleash all of your fury on the professional media complex that has lied and lied and lied to you.
My name is Mikael Nordfors. I'm a medical doctor, author, musician and political reformist from Sweden. And I have started an organization called People's Court. And our aim is to support everyone standing up against the tyranny, the medical tyranny now getting all over the world, so that people don't have to be afraid. We'll help them to get a new work, get money, support, collect money to support all the people standing up. And we will arrange a new Nuremberg trial, hopefully in Nuremberg, to litigate against all the criminals behind this hoax.
I'm now hearing lunatics, and I'll call them lunatics, the idiocy, they're being stupid, they're following conspiracy theory. Maybe they're such morons they can't understand this. I don't want a bunch of idiots sitting anywhere near us in Fenway that haven't taken the vaccine. They want to die. That's their right as Americans. They don't have to take the vaccine and they can die. They can live in ignorance and stupidity. So smart people who actually follow science, the government, our sports teams, our organizations, our concert promoters, damn well better put together something where you can show your vaccine receipt. This anti-science idiocy, you know what? Let them do that under a rock or in their caves. But you know what? The time to try to reason with these people has long passed.
It doesn't matter that they're brainwashing children into thinking that wearing masks are normal.
Wear a mask each time you go out. Yes, Mommy, we'll wear masks when we're out. Wave, but don't hug, shake hands or high five. Yes, Mommy, we'll wave high and bye.
And that getting the vaccine is cool.
You got the vaccine, they got the vaccine, we got the vaccine. We can get back to normal, let me inform you, let's all get the vaccine. It's about community immunity. I'm talking unity for you and me. If Doc says it's good, then trust me, it's good. Now let's all get the vaccine.
So once you get the vaccine, you're no better off than you were before, if you've believed the narrative up until this point. As a CNN article by Sandy Lamont, February 3rd, 2021, entitled, "I've had my COVID-19 vaccine. Now what can I safely do? Your questions answered." She says, "You've received the second dose of a COVID-19 vaccine currently on the Western market." And she names a few of the vaccines. She says, "Does that mean that you're free to go about life as you did before the pandemic, once immunity kicks in?" Sorry. There is no immunity passport yet.
All the mouth breathers, the dumb people, the hillbillies and inbreds and extra chromosome folks, the Trumpers,
are all spun up with their conspiracy theories about vaccine passports. Come on. There are no vaccine passports. That's insane. It's Alex Jones stuff. And by the way, just so you know, as proof, if you want to get a job, you'll need your vaccine papers.
Although it's always challenging in society to make things mandatory, perhaps in certain employment settings, especially where there's higher risk, we may as a society decide that mandatory vaccination is a reasonable thing to do in certain circumstances.
And who's a vaccinated person. So eventually there will be this digital immunity proof.
Proving you've been vaccinated will be vital, and tech companies are designing ways to show it. Jolene Kent has more on that.
Some countries are considering implementing systems which would require people to show proof of inoculation before accessing certain facilities. A so-called vaccine passport program. It's already in place in Israel.
You get a shot, then you get a digital pass on your phone, and then you can get into restaurants and pubs. Israelis must now scan in to get in. To gyms, hotels, even concerts like this.
It is all set in the telephone. It's very convenient.
The government-issued Green Pass shows personal details and proves they've had 2 doses of a COVID-19 vaccine. Now countries across Europe and beyond are considering similar so-called vaccine passports or immunity certificates. The UK is studying whether to introduce vaccine certificates, raising the possibility that Brits could soon need a passport for a pint.
Yep, all good.
Potential discrimination against people who don't want a shot, along with those who can't get one, for medical reasons or because there's not enough supply.
So these people won't be able to participate in life, in public life, in social life, in economic life, in the same way as their counterparts who have been vaccinated.
Can I please stop wearing a face mask? Let's face it, the answer is no. You should think of your mask, according to the article, as your new best friend. Well, when can I hang out with my friends and my family? Well, that depends upon everyone's vaccine status. When can I eat at indoor restaurants or go to a concert or a sporting event? So with the second vaccine, you're still taking a chance that you might be exposed to COVID-19 and become a silent spreader. Can I travel if I've been vaccinated? Well, getting vaccinated does not say, now I have a free pass to travel, Fauci said in a CNN global town hall. Nor does it say that I have a free pass to put aside all the public health measures that we talk about all the time. It doesn't matter that the flu has been almost eradicated from the face of the earth.
Well, I'm looking at these numbers. It's incredible. The county is only reporting 39 cases of the flu so far. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you. That's it's remarkable. It's due in large to the fact that people are wearing masks, but also we know that in the Southern Hemisphere, that flu season was actually low as well. So I think it's a reflection of what's going on around the world.
Yeah, I mean, just to put it in perspective, I mean, last year we had 20,000 cases of the flu, 108 deaths, and 62 outbreaks.
Well, not really. They're just transferring the flu numbers over to the COVID section. COVID seems to be the new Pac-Man, eating up all the flu virus from all over the world. It doesn't matter that all the news outlets are continuing to repeat the same mantras. The new one is time to heal. You remember how doctors in white lab coats were used to sell cigarettes.
In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
It doesn't matter that Prince Charles is calling for a military footing that we should be operating under worldwide.
So, what do we do? Without doubt, we must now put ourselves on a warlike footing.
Just like in the coronavirus training exercise known as Event 201, the same verbiage is used.
For the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
It doesn't matter that lawsuits are being prepared to demonstrate that there is no COVID outbreak, but rather There's just a phony PCR test outbreak being amplified by roundtable group-owned media, causing the mass panic, the hysteria, that's completely unfounded and without merit.
Everything must be done to make sure that no one will ever again be in a position of such power as to be able to defraud humanity or to attempt to manipulate us with their corrupt agendas. And for this reason, I will now explain to you how and where an international network of lawyers will argue this biggest tort case ever, the Corona fraud scandal, which has meanwhile unfolded into probably the greatest crime against humanity ever committed.
In the diagnostic world, in PCR, you would never diagnose with just a positive or negative. You have to actually sequence what is the test measuring. And, you know, there was 1,500 PCR tests were sequenced in October 2020, and all of them were influenza A and B. Not one were SARS-CoV-2. They are using these tests, and they are false, that people can then sue the ministers and prime ministers and the diagnostic companies and anyone administering the test. And the reason is that the ministers and prime ministers are spending citizens or people's money, and that is under procurement, and there are commercial, contracts. And if they should be testing whether these tests are testing for SARS-CoV-2 or something else, if they are spending money and the tests are not detecting the causative agent, SARS-CoV-2, then they are engaging in fraud, and that is malfeasance in public office, which is a crime in Canada, Ireland, UK, America, 5 to 10 years. But the Prime Minister personally can be sued because that's malfeasance in public office. So any indemnity they may have had does not apply if they have not done their duty of care to check that the testing was correct.
We know that Anthony Fauci, that Ralph Baric, that the Center for Disease Control, and the laundry list of people who wanted to take credit for inventing coronavirus were at the hub of this story. From 2003 to 2018, they controlled 100% of the cash flow that built the empire around the industrial complex of coronavirus. On April the 25th, 2003, the U.S. Center for Disease Control filed a patent on the coronavirus transmitted to humans. Under 35 U.S. Code Section 101, nature is prohibited from being patented. If it was manufactured, it was a violation of biological and chemical weapons, treaties, and laws. If it was natural, filing a patent on it was illegal. In the spring of 2007, the CDC filed a petition with the Patent Office to keep their application confidential and private. They actually filed patents on not only the virus, but they also filed patents on its detection and a kit to measure it. Because of that CDC patent, you cannot look at the virus, you cannot measure it, you cannot develop a test kit for it, and by ultimately receiving the patents that constrained anyone from using it, they had the means, they had the motive, and most of all, they had the monetary gain from turning coronavirus from a pathogen to profit. And they made sure that they controlled the proprietary rights to the disease, to the virus, and to its detection, and all of the measurement of it.
When I hear the news talking about COVID vaccinations, lockdowns, masks, social distancing, second and third waves, new strains, and spikes in deaths and in cases, all I hear is...
In a desperate attempt to fill 24 hours of programming, here's some bullshit that happened somewhere today. We've got some footage here of the bullshit, which began just after 3 o'clock this afternoon, when residents in this neighborhood were shocked to see this fairly common thing happening. An attractive witness described the event in breathless terms.
I went to my window and I was like, whoa, there's some bullshit happening.
That happened right over there.
I'm an older man, so you can trust what I say.
Authorities in special uniforms rushed to the scene to stand around while our cameras filmed them. Our reporter Keith Collins joins us now live from the scene of the bullshit through the use of expensive technology. Good to be with you again, Keith. We have a colorful graphic here that shows instances of bullshit like this are on the rise. Is that right?
Yes, although why is unclear. Some say it's because of one fucking reason. Others say it's because of some other fucking reason. I talked to this random expert on the subject who told me this thing you're about to hear him say right after he points at a piece of paper.
I spent my entire life attending the nation's most prestigious schools to talk about bullshit like this.
A lot of opinions there to make this story seem somewhat meaningful.
Oh, absolutely, Glenn. This bullshit has some broader implications. Here's a list of tips on how to avoid bullshit happening to you.
Because that's all that it really is. All of this doublethink, doublespeak.
Doublespeak is language designed to evade responsibility. Basically, it's language that pretends to communicate, but really doesn't. It is language designed to mislead while pretending not to. It's language used by people who are very intelligent and very sophisticated in the use of language and know that you can do an awful lot with language.
It's something straight out of Orwell.
I think the most important point in 1984 is that power grows not out of the barrel of a gun. Power grows not out of the thought police and rule by terror. It grows out of the power of language in that.
To keep the masses confused, bickering over, which science is correct, which politicians are correct, and which methods are correct.
Those in power who control language control the way we see the world. See, any politician in power starts using doublespeak. They all lie. They all use doublespeak.
Call it the wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this. So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic.
Listen, I'm a politician, which means I'm a cheat and a liar. And when I'm not kissing babies, I'm stealing their lollipops.
They all lie. They all use doublespeak.
We just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA.
My understanding is that these vaccines do not modify your DNA or RNA.
We just don't know the long-term side effects of basically modifying people's DNA and RNA.
My understanding is that these vaccines do not modify your DNA or RNA.
They all lie. They all use doublespeak.
It reminds me of those internet shower pranks where the pranksters keep pouring shampoo on the heads of those showering.
Shampoo! Fucking shampoo!
Who have their eyes closed, not able to see the pranksters putting additional shampoo on their head without them being aware. People with their mind's eye closed to any alternate narratives are unable to see the obvious fact that they're being manipulated by people outside of their peripheral vision. In this same way, these roundtable groups do the exact same thing. They will continue to manipulate the masses through puppet politicians, having the people blame them and their governments instead of the roundtable groups. Protests, rallies, riots, and racially charged rhetoric provide the fuel for mass confusion. And as the masses unleash their frustration on cities and governments, on everything but the real perpetrators, the roundtable groups, they will continue to do this as long as they can, because it's their job to maintain power, and they're proficient at it. Maintaining power for who and for what purpose is the subject of another video series that we're working on. But when people start to suspect them, they conveniently label everything a conspiracy theory in their media for public dismissal. The other tactic is to get the people to blame each other, kind of like the two ladies in the footage.
What are you doing? I didn't do anything. I don't know why you're freaking out. Well, the shampoo's not coming off. What kind of shampoo do you use? I thought you said you use this shampoo too. Yeah, but mine's not like laundry detergent.
Not knowing that there is someone outside their frame of reference controlling the shampoo. And no matter how much they rinse their head, the soap is still there. All they need to do is open their eyes and see what is going on. But the fear of the pain of getting soap in their eyes keeps their eyes shut and ignorant to the tricksters that are pranking them for private gain. And then they blame each other, just like politically, Democrats and Republicans blame each other.
What are you doing?
Ideologically, liberals and conservatives blame each other.
I didn't do anything.
Economically, the poor blame the rich.
Well, the shampoo's not coming off.
Social economically, the working class blames the merchant class.
What kind of shampoo do you use?
Each, not knowing the who, behind the scenes, puppeting their every move. And when people get hip to this new world order idea, and they speak out against it,
you can stick your coronavirus up your arm. You can stick your coronavirus up your arm. You can stick your coronavirus. Stick your coronavirus up your arm.
The roundtable groups respond through their pseudoscience and media with a resounding no, and they fire back, sticking their new world order straight up your
anal swabs ACE, a new type of coronavirus test that could detect the virus more accurately.
让它统计肛门，统计去之后2-3厘米，然后转3圈，然后拿出来看有没有颜色改变，有的话插到咱们这管里。
This same sort of behavior is what we saw with the anti-war dissenting voices from the intelligence communities who were adamant that Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction and posed no threat to the United States or its allies.
Realistically speaking, no. Iraq has been disarmed fundamentally. Their weapons programs have been eliminated. And if we got weapons inspectors back in, you can ensure that these weapons programs would not be reconstituted. Iraq has no capability today to project meaningful military power outside of its borders. Iraq poses no threat to any of its neighbors. It does not threaten its region. It does not threaten the United States. It does not threaten the world.
It's the same sort of shenanigans we saw foisted upon the world with trust the intelligence, unless the intelligence teams provide contrary information than the narrative. In that case, trust the narrative. In case of 9/11, you ignore them. In case of COVID, we censor them. And now, with AI and facial recognition and machine learning leading the way.
Facial recognition, even with masks. A Chinese company says it's developed technology to identify people even while they're wearing surgical masks amid the coronavirus outbreak.
In the past, we had to take off our masks to use facial recognition.
Huang claims it can identify everyone in a crowd of up to 30 people within a second.
London police are set to roll out live facial recognition technology across the city.
The technology issues an image to a handheld device that the police officers will have, and they will make the decision whether or not to engage with that person to try and ascertain, is it the person that we want to speak to.
Facial recognition works by analyzing a face and breaking it down into unique identifiers and then comparing those unique IDs to a database of already mapped faces. So how many faces and which faces are in that database are what gives a facial recognition system its real power. But a new report in the New York Times in January of 2020 shined a light on a stunning milestone. Clearview AI, which was a previously unknown company, has claimed to have scraped 3 billion photos from social media sites. So with every year, those databases are growing larger and larger. And now with Clearview AI, we've seen what could be the largest facial recognition database in the world. And defenders of the technology say that that's a good thing, that it will enable law enforcement to protect citizens in these unprecedented ways.
The FBI tracked down 61-year-old Charles Holland at a Walmart store in Salem, Oregon on Tuesday. The FBI used a newer facial recognition technology.
Eminent domain is the idea that the government has the power to take private property and convert it into public use. You see, it's the body that gets sick. It's the body that transmits the fictitious disease. It's the body that needs to be distanced from others. It's the body that transmits without showing symptoms. It's the body that must mask up. It's the body that is now the indirect property of the state.
You know, it's astonishing, the arrogance that this is all on the internet. This is all on their websites. It's not on conspiracy sites. I mean, they would love for everyone to be chipped,
to get, vaccinations for this and that. Essentially, under their plan, you lose control of your body. And it's this bargain that in exchange for that, you can trust them to make your life better.
And it's the body which you think is yours, but gets treated like an animal on a farm. It's the body that needs to be tagged, tracked, controlled, traced, proved to be up to current medical code requirements in order to socialize with others in the herd on this new global farm. The post 9/11 era introduced America to a new idea of homeland security and its all-seeing, all-hearing security surveillance state under the guise of the terrorist surveillance program. You see, those dastardly terrorists scared us so bad we now have to control every piece of information that can be transmitted from anyone, anywhere, all the time, at any time. In the
Hi, COVID. Hello.
19 era, we're introduced to a new concept, biosecurity, where we're so scared of that dastardly virus that now we have to not only surveil, but track, control, trace, and analyze the movements of bodies of every human being, anywhere, everywhere, all the time. So in a mere 20 years, they've moved the needle forward from homeland security and total surveillance, keeping track of everyone, everywhere, all the time, to biosecurity, or the ability to globally enforce laws restricting the movement of bodies of anyone, anywhere, all the time, and at any time. Shortly after the 9/11 event, we get the details on what the Bush administration authorizes in wake of 9/11.
We had plans that had been, developed in the past that had reached their due date with 9/11.
They come blazing forward with a fully architected plan. We are going to spread this over 80 countries. We are going to go at it with this 8-pronged attack.
All you need to know is that there was a before 9/11 and there was an after 9/11. After 9/11, the gloves come off.
The CIA codename for the covert program would become Greystone.
Greystone was a sensitive, compartmented information program which had both foreign and domestic components. Greystone was a program for capturing and transporting via aircraft HVTs, or high-value targets, or terrorist suspects around the world, and maintaining secret black site prisons in various countries, and the use of special interrogation methods known as extraordinary rendition. In other words, the abduction and extrajudicial transfer of persons from one country to another for the purpose of circumventing the former country's laws on things like, interrogation, detention, and torture.
They had a matrix that they offered to the White House that said, these are the countries we need to go into.
In less than a week, the president initiated Greystone.
I had never seen a presidential authorization as far-reaching and as aggressive in scope. It was simply extraordinary.
Greystone has a dozen subcompartments and subprograms that were only known by those that were directly involved, controlled by a unique numbering system. Under the infamous terrorist surveillance program was an electronic surveillance program ran by the NSA after 9/11.
Greystone was underway well beyond the borders of Afghanistan.
A couple weeks into the war, we were asked, is there anything more we can do to defend the homeland? We began a conversation with the vice president and then with the president, saying that here are some additional things we could do, but we cannot do them because we do not currently have authorities to do them. That was the basis of the evolution of what became the terrorist surveillance program.
Now the legal framework was put in place to catch up to where the technology was. Kind of like when the internet exploded upon the scene, new laws for privacy, usage, and intellectual property rights were needed.
The NSA created a global electronic dragnet, capable of reaching into America's communication networks, capturing 1.7 billion intercepts every day.
The National Security Agency has a huge vacuum cleaner around the world, and it is sucking down information from computer networks, from radios, from telephone calls, all over the world. So much information that no human being could ever go through it on a daily basis.
It was a part of what was known as the President's Surveillance Program. Information collected under this program was protected in a sensitive compartmented information security compartment codenamed Stellar Wind, which in turn was conducted under the overall umbrella of the War on Terrorism.
The NSA spent billions of dollars on more than 480 private companies. Michael Hayden led the effort in the days right after 9/11.
I did it at NSA, George did it at CIA, we all did it. It was a way to go out there and to get these capabilities into the flow infinitely more quickly than you would have been able to do had you gone through the government personnel system.
We were falling deeper and deeper into a secretly run government. The amount of secrecy is phenomenal. The desire and the willingness of government to operate in secret and to deny the public, the media, the basic facts about what they were doing was all inclusive.
Exactly how much money the NSA was spending in the years after 9/11 is one of the government's most closely guarded secrets.
Had this boom in the corporate intelligence world as well. Companies like CACI, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, just all the old-fashioned industrial, we're building ships and submarines type corporations quickly moved into the intelligence and information space.
There's a government facility back in there. You'll see it better after we turn down this road.
Inside buildings like these, they launch drone strikes, gather and spread secret information, engage in cyber conflict.
It looks like commercial office space. Huge new bureaucracy that you can't really see.
The NSA had created, way before 9/11, a global electronic dragnet that was expanded immensely after 9/11 to provide what was known as full spectrum dominance in signals intelligence gathering, collecting virtually all data transmissions, everywhere, all the time. It was a global network of electronic spy stations that can eavesdrop on telephones and faxes and modems and emails and text messages, video, online chat, medical histories and bank accounts, you name it, under SIGINT or Signals Intelligence.
Former defense analyst William Arkin spent years trying to track the post-9/11 growth of America's hidden intelligence world.
It's a government organization. It shows up nowhere. It's like it's a cover address. There's no defense organization there. I'll have to go look at it, or you'll have to go look at it.
Okay.
Working with Dana Priest, the two would do what no one else had done. Identify one by one the buildings and companies in what they called Top Secret America.
Defense policy analysis, the Defense Program Support, Asymmetric Warfare Group, Project...
According to the NSA, SIGINT involves collecting foreign intelligence from communication and information systems and providing it to customers across the U.S. government, such as senior civilian and military officials. They then use this information to protect our troops, support our allies, fight terrorism, combat international crime and narcotics, support diplomatic negotiations, and advance many other important national objectives. This information is stored in echelon computers, which can keep millions of records on individuals.
It took me about a year to complete a decent catalog of the government entities and corporate entities that work in this world.
The only way they could verify any of it was to go there in person.
Two separate buildings.
Hundreds of secret locations hiding in plain sight in office parks.
For the rest of my life, I will never see the world the same way again, especially around Washington.
So had it not been for the leaves off the trees and at night, you would never see this thing.
And yet it's gigantic.
Yeah.
These buildings that they might only be 4 stories high, but they go down 10 stories. And there's a whole world down there, like shops and places to eat that you don't know about. That's just for them.
They had uncovered a new secret world that had grown up in the years after 9/11.
You could put the dots on the map. You had an alternative geography of the United States, a secret geography it is not revealed to the public, even though it may be next to your back door.
And DHS has continued a nationwide spending spree, sending billions of dollars to state and local police.
What DHS wants to do is to turn all of the local and state law enforcement personnel into the tipsters for the FBI.
DHS funded high-tech terrorism centers around the country.
Every state has at least one. There's 74 fusion centers in the United States.
Contractors went in, put in the large flat-screen TVs, put in the mission control to the moon kind of facilities.
Now, state and local police are using surveillance cameras, biometric scanners, high-tech license plate readers.
The software with the system, when it sees what it thinks is a license plate, it will read it using OCR, optical character recognition, and make a cross-check against a database.
The codename Frosting was the umbrella program that had two parts established by the NSA back in 1966 to collect and process data from communication satellites Transcend and Echelon. Echelon is the signals intelligence program operated by the United States and the NSA. It's a global system of mass surveillance and industrial espionage where information is collected and shared between 5 countries. The 5 countries are the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, under what's known as the UK-USA Security Agreement. This agreement between these 5 countries established what became known as the Five Eyes.
It's all about power, money, and control.
The Five Eyes Alliance was created in the aftermath of World War II to monitor enemy communications and share intelligence between its founding nations. It is now recognized as the largest spying network in history.
The Five Eyes is an intelligence alliance for joint cooperation and signals intelligence to track, control, trace, analyze, and report on every type of transmission from around the world all the time.
You look around and say, well, there's this explosion in digital communications. This is our new target. In order to keep up with it, we have to have an ever-increasing budget. We need more and more people. That's how you build an empire.
The 9/11 terrorist attacks on the United States gave the Five Eyes a legitimate reason to expand.
It was going in this direction anyway, but 9/11 incredibly accelerated it. Once you got the terrorist attack here, we became very unforgiving in not grabbing communications. And so we accelerated our ability, our, for want of a better word, invasiveness into communications networks in which legitimate targets coexisted with legitimately protected communications.
As a result of changes since September 11, 2001, the Five Eyes Alliance is now capable of capturing virtually every phone conversation, email, internet search, or social media entry in the world.
The programs that are associated with the Five Eyes are many, but we'll cover a few here. X-Keyscore was a system used by the National Security Agency in the United States for searching and analyzing global internet data. PRISM collected and stored internet communications based on the demands made to internet companies such as Google LLC under Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act of 2008 to turn over any data that matched court-approved search terms. Carnivore, or later DCS 1000, was a system implemented by the FBI that was designed to monitor email and electronic communications using a customizable packet sniffer that can monitor all of a target user's internet traffic. It was later replaced with Naris Insight, which was a supercomputer system. Then there's Dishfire. Dishfire is a global covert surveillance collection system and database that's ran by the United States, along with the United Kingdom's Government Communications Headquarters, or GCHQ. that collects hundreds of millions of text messages on a daily basis from around the world. And then there's Tempora. Tempora uses the intercepts of fiber optic cables that serve as the backbone of the internet to gain access to large amounts of internet users' personal data without any individual suspicion or targeting. And then there's Fairview. It's a secret program under which the National Security Agency cooperates with the American telecommunications company AT&T in order to collect phone, internet, and email data, mainly of foreign country citizens at major cable landing stations and switching stations. And then there was Mystic. Mystic gave them, the United States and the NSA, full capability to record the content of phone calls of an entire country for 30 days. DCSN, or the Digital Collection System Network, or DCSNet, is the FBI's point-and-click surveillance system that can perform instant wiretaps on almost any telecommunications device within the United States. And then there's Boundless Informant. It's a big data analyst and data visualization tool used by the United States and the National Security Agency. It gives the NSA managers summaries of the NSA's worldwide data collection activities by counting metadata. And then there's Bull Run. Bull Run was a highly classified program to crack encryption of online communications and data transmission. And then there was Pinwheel. Pinwheel was part of a multi-tiered system to address the issue of the NSA collecting so much internet data that it could only be stored for short periods of time. And then there was Stingray. Stingray was a device that mimics wireless carrier cell phone towers in order to force all nearby mobile phones and cellular data devices to connect to it. And then there was Rampart A. Rampart A was a global surveillance and worldwide signals intelligence partnership program led by the United States and the National Security Agency. In 2013, the program had access to over 3 terabytes or 1,000 gigabytes per second of data streaming worldwide and encompassed all communication technologies such as voice, fax, telex, modem, email, internet, chat, virtual private networks or VPNs, and voice over IP or VoIPs, and all voice call records, text messages, and metadata. All the information collected by the United States and the NSA could be shared with the Five Eyes group for joint surveillance operations.
If you wanted them to do that in the 21st century, you have to be in the flow of data that actually contained your information and mine. There's no other way.
Once you adopt these totalitarian procedures, I mean, this is straight out of the KGB, Stasi, Gestapo, SS, Mao's people, everybody. All the dictators and despots down through history do this kind of thing. And so once you adopt that, then you have to do in secret, pass laws or change things and suppress your population and keep them from knowing what you're doing. And so you have an uninformed public.
It didn't take long for the new president to make clear where he stood.
That they were going to be just as tough, if not tougher, than the Bush people.
In the investigation of the black sites, I found a worldwide system of about 24 prisons throughout the world, run by the CIA, paid by the CIA, organized by the CIA, but with cooperation from other countries.
Top CIA official John Rizzo helped authorize the prisons.
That facilities had to be built overseas, secret facilities.
For the first time, the White House had approved the building of an international prison system entirely in secret. The president had reauthorized almost all of the dark side operations.
Authorities were continued that were originally granted by President Bush, beginning shortly after 9/11. Those were all picked up, reviewed, and endorsed by the Obama administration.
The president decided to expand the growth of top secret America.
They've done nothing to roll it back. They've done very little to look inside of it.
In his first year in office, the massive Department of Homeland Security began construction of their new $3.4 billion headquarters. It will rival the Pentagon as the largest government complex ever built in Washington.
In addition to the core nations of the Five Eyes Alliance, There exist 2 other international intelligence sharing agreements that have been confirmed. And so these next 2 agreements, they have expanded the original Five Eyes countries into what became known as the Nine Eyes, and then later the 14 Eyes alliances. And so the original 5 are the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. This was expanded to include the Nine Eyes, which were the original Five Eyes plus Denmark, France, Holland, and Norway, later expanded into the 14 Eyes alliance that consists of the Nine Eyes plus Germany, Belgium, Italy, Sweden, and Spain. And so this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of global surveillance, as there are many other projects and programs that go under the umbrella of SIGINT, or Signals Intelligence. You see, control over all private property, the means of production, and all avenues of trade, combined with the real-time ability to completely surveil all people everywhere, all the time, in addition to the ability to control the bodies of all people everywhere, all the time, is real power. This power is being foisted upon all the nations of the world via the roundtable organizations, under the guise of a common enemy or a common boogeyman predicated solely on fear.
COVID, gangbusters with ratings. Gangbusters with ratings, right? Which is why we constantly have a death toll on the side. Let's make it higher. Like, why isn't it high enough, today? Like, it would make our point better if it was higher. It's fear. Like, fear really drives numbers. Fear is the thing that keeps you tuned in. If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads?
Yeah. No one ever says those things out loud, but it's obvious.
Global cooling, global warming, climate change.
So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
Do you think it's going to be just like a lot of fear, like climate?
Yeah, fear sells. Fear sells. No one ever says those things out loud, but it's obvious.
Rogue nations, terrorist states, 9/11, war on terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, and now Cyrus the phony virus. I think Alexander King and Schneider, in their book, Their First Global Revolution, say it best. They say, the common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. Former World Health Organization Director Brock Chisholm, in Christian World Report, March of 1991, says, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas. And so, once those ideas are removed, you rebuild the mindset of the next generation to think of themselves in a world community rather than nationalistic. Albert Einstein, quoted by Christopher Hamer in A Global Parliament, Principles of World Federation, 1998, says, in my opinion, the only salvation for civilization and the human race lies in the creation of a world government with security of nations founded upon law. As long as sovereign states continue to have separate armaments and armament secrets, new world wars will be inevitable. Mikhail Gorbachev, as quoted by Nicholas Hager in The World Government in 2010, he says, there is an increasing awareness of the need for some form of global government. James Warburg, chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, that's a roundtabler, provides testimony before the U.S. Senate, February 17, 1950, as quoted by the Family Guardian Fellowship. It says, we shall have world government, whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest. Harry S. Truman. In Public Papers of the Presidents of the United States, Harry S. Truman, June 28, 1945, Volume 1 says, if Kansas and Colorado have a quarrel over a watershed, they don't call out the National Guard of each state and go to war over it. They bring suit in the Supreme Court and abide by its decision. There isn't a reason in the world why we can't do that internationally. There were 2 documents signed at San Francisco. One of them was the Charter of the United Nations. The other one was the World Court. It will require ratification of both of those charters and the putting of them into effect if we expect to have world peace for future generations. This is one of the tasks which has been assigned to me. I am accepting the responsibility. I am going to carry it out. Earl Browder, a former leader of the U.S. Communist Party, says in his book Victory and After, he says, the communists worked energetically and tirelessly to lay the foundations of the United Nations, which we were sure would come into existence. Richard Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, that's a roundtabler, the author of The Opportunity, America's Moment to Alter History's Course, in the Taipei Times, Tuesday, February 21st, 2006, page 90 says, state sovereignty must be altered in the globalized era. In the age of globalization, states should give up some sovereignty to world bodies in order to protect their interests. Haas continues, he says, globalization thus implies that sovereignty not only becoming weaker in reality, but it needs to become weaker. States should be wise to weaken sovereignty in order to protect themselves, because they cannot insulate themselves from what goes on elsewhere. Sovereignty is no longer a sanctuary. In Guidebook is quoted by John A. Stormer in None Dare Call It Treason, Liberty Bell Press, 1964, page 112. He says, as we have pointed out, it is frequently the family that infects the child with extreme nationalism. The school should therefore use the means described earlier to combat family attitudes. This needs to be done, of course, because nationalism is a hindrance to world government. Chester Ward, U.S. Navy Admiral, quoted by Gary Allen in The Rockefeller Files, page 35, says, the objective of influential majority of the members of the Council on Foreign Relations of the CFR has not changed since its founding in 1922, more than 50 years ago. In the 50th anniversary of Foreign Affairs, that's their publication, he did not back away from defining it. He says, our national purpose should be to abolish our nationality. Indeed, he pulled out all the emotional stops in a hard sell for global government. As the Stanford Encyclopedia on the topic of world government puts it, Nathan and Norton, 1960, organizations such as the United World Federalists, established in 1947, called for the transformation of the United Nations into a universal federation of states with the power to control armaments. World peace requires that states should give up their traditional unrestricted sovereign rights to amass weapons and wage war, and that they should submit their disputes to an authoritative international institutions of adjudication and enforcement. World peace would only be achieved through the establishment of world law. On the same page it says, Albert Einstein wrote in 1946 that technological developments had shrunk the planet through increased economic interdependence and mutual vulnerability through weapons of mass destruction. Although his adherence to the idea of world government to guarantee interstate peace preceded the development of nuclear weapons, Einstein's advocacy gained momentum with the risk of nuclear annihilation. A world government must be created, which is able to solve conflicts between nations by judicial decision. The government must be based on a clear-cut constitution, which is approved by the governments and nations, which gives it the sole disposition of offensive weapons. We can see that the people behind the scenes calling for the centralization of power, the removal of national sovereignty and individual rights and freedoms, and placing weapons into the hands of a global state are nothing more than the offshoots of the roundtable groups, their sub-organizations, think tanks, and more powerful NGOs. And they're successful because people buy into these phony pretexts for world wars and nuclear weapons, terrorism and terror, climate change, total surveillance, and biosecurity, which are being controlled by carefully constructed rings within rings of power, which they say they're at the center of. It's a tale straight out of J.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all.
And in the darkness, find them.
This reminds me of the UN weapons inspectors and intelligence teams when they couldn't find those weapons of mass destruction, and links to Al-Qaeda.
Where are Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction?
Former Chief Weapons Inspector David Kay said last week, quote, "We were all wrong about Saddam's WMD."
By now, the world knows there was a massive intelligence failure in the war on Iraq.
Those facts alone didn't prevent then, nor has it stopped now, the war on Iraq. Nor did it stop the United States and its coalition forces from invading a sovereign nation on a false pretense, plundering its natural resources, war profiteering, creating blood money profits, using the blood of the sons and daughters of American and coalition forces, fighting yet another phony round table war. And to question the war narratives like, were there really weapons of mass destruction and links to Al-Qaeda? Is there really a new deadly virus sweeping across the world? To delegitimize the wars, they say, is to delegitimize the efforts made by either the troops or the first responders. This again is 100% utter nonsense. The troops and the frontline workers responded perfectly and were poised to do their jobs, whether or not the war that they were fighting was real or proxy or contrived. In The New Freedom, a call for the emancipation of the generous energies of a people, President Woodrow Wilson says on page 13, some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. In the Elks magazine, August 1956, J. Edgar Hoover is quoted as saying, "The menace of communism in this country will remain a menace until the American people make themselves aware of the techniques of communism. No one who truly understands what it really is can be taken by it, yet the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists." Barry Goldwater, U.S. Senator, a representative from Arizona, in his book With No Apology, says, the Trilateralist Commission, that would be the roundtable groups, is international and is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateralist Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. Thomas Molnar, in The Decline of the Intellectual, 1961, Chapter 7 on planetary coexistence, says, influential individuals and groups are pressing for global economic cooperation, global taxes to support the backwards territories, a global army, and a world government, even for a worldwide moral consciousness. Whatever the future of these recommendations, there is no doubt that the tactics, the methods, the announced aims fall under the category of social engineering. The list of United Nations specialized agencies and world programs show the vastness of today's quote-unquote global cooperation. These guys have every aspect of our future all sewn up in a nice, neat communist, fascist, new world order, one world government dystopia with the big fat Luciferian bow right on top, awaiting their next false flag terrorist attack, pandemic, space alien invading, asteroid colliding, boogeyman generating event that they've planned generations ago. So they'll tell you what's going to happen in advance so that we shouldn't be surprised. If you still think that this has anything to do with political parties, the paper presidents, Biden, Trump, Bush, Obama, Clinton, appointed by the roundtable groups as your quote-unquote choices, they are simply tools of Hegelian thesis, antithesis, synthesis frameworks being used as a divide and conquer strategy by the roundtable groups, their sub-organizations, think tanks, and more powerful NGOs, and ultimately serve the interests of the United Nations, which they are laying the infrastructure to make through them the world government. If we find ourselves keenly unaware of the history and legacy of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, the Bohemian Grove, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, Budapest, and Madrid, the Royal and Canadian Institutes of International Affairs, and many other such think tanks and institutions spawned directly or indirectly from the Cecil Rhodes Milner Roundtable organizations, and we fail to realize the power and influence they've wielded over the last 100 years, we may find ourselves only to understand what is happening in a very simplistic or binary context framed as Democrats versus Republicans, liberals versus conservatives, the far right versus the far left, elites versus the serfs, communists versus the capitalists, blacks versus whites, the rich versus the poor, all equally illegitimate and irrelevant as holistic frameworks for viewing the reality of our current situation. So what is life going to be like in this New World Order socialist dystopia that's being unveiled right before our very eyes in real time?
Are you ready for the Great Reset? 2021 may be a pivotal year. Wealthy global elites are planning your future, and what they intend for America and the world may startle you. Dale Hurd explains.
Here's a video of your future if some people at the World Economic Forum get their way. They say you'll own nothing and be happy about it. Energy will be green, rationed, and expensive, and travel will be restricted. Even your diet will be controlled, and currency will be digital. This left-wing dystopian dream is called the Great Reset, and you're supposed to be excited about it. The Great Reset has been labeled a conspiracy theory, and even sounds like a conspiracy theory. But everything we know about it comes from the global elites themselves, who have been quite open about it.
In future, there may be nowhere to hide. Smart cities will pullulate with sensors, all joined together by the Internet of Things. Bollards communing invisibly with lampposts, so there is always a parking space for your electric car, so that no bin goes unemptied, no street unswept, and the urban environment is as antiseptic as a Zurich pharmacy. But this technology could also be used to keep every citizen under round-the-clock surveillance. A future Alexa will pretend to take orders, but this Alexa will be watching you, clucking her tongue and stamping her foot. In future, voice connectivity will be in every room and almost every object. Your mattress will monitor your nightmares, your fridge will beep for more cheese, your front door will sweep wide the moment you approach like some silent butler. Your smart meter will go hustling of its own accord for the cheapest electricity, and every one of them minutely transcribing your every habit in tiny electronic shorthand, stored not in their chips or in their innards, nowhere you can find it, but in some great cloud of data that lowers ever more oppressively over the human race. A giant, dark thundercloud.
Any communication intercepts that she flags a threat. She analyzes it and tells us what to pay attention to.
We're still beta testing. I'm pushing to get her online sooner.
To control people's behaviors, to control businesses, and to move society in the direction that you want to move it, it will change the way businesses are evaluated. It'll coerce businesses to pursue left-wing causes.
The Great Reset was unveiled at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where many of the world's most powerful people go to offer solutions to the world's problems. And the World Economic Forum sees the coronavirus pandemic as a historic opportunity to change the way the world operates. Their solution is essentially global socialism. Think of the Green New Deal combined with the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, and throw in something called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, in which technology is supposed to radically change the way we live and work. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum.
What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
This is worse than Nazism. This is worse than communism. This is worse than fascism. These guys are planning on taking over the whole world.
They're big on us not owning anything. It's an Uber model applied to everything. And so you can have more, and maybe you don't have to pay for certain things, but they can be yanked away from you because you don't own them. It's the abolition of private property. It's the control of energy. They're going to essentially tax and penalize fossil fuels into the ground so that all that's left is green energy. This is their big chance to remake the world, and they're going for it.
Platforms could also be designed for real-time censorship of every conversation, with offending words automatically deleted. Indeed, in some countries, this happens today. Digital authoritarianism is not, alas, the stuff of dystopian fantasy, but of an emerging reality. At stake is whether we bequeath an Orwellian world designed for censorship and repression and control, or a world of emancipation, debate, and learning.
I think it's going to be a lot like Magic Mountain, but on steroids. You see, it starts with a comprehensive plan of new health and safety measures.
At Six Flags, your safety is always our #1 priority, and we have developed a comprehensive plan of new health and safety measures to help keep our guests and team members safe.
First, you have to make a reservation.
Every guest will be required to make a reservation for a specific date to visit.
Well, that's track and trace. Then there's limited park capacity to maintain social distancing.
By limiting the number of people in the park, everyone will have more room to move around and maintain proper social distancing.
Or simply stated, population control. Welcome to the technocracy.
New cutting-edge thermal imaging will be used to take temperatures of all guests and team members entering the park.
High-tech security screenings for contactless baggage checks.
We are implementing new high-tech security screenings to allow touchless bag checks, allowing for quicker and safer entry into the park.
Masks for groupthink and group identity, social conformance and compliance.
All guests and team members must wear a mask while in the park. Everyone on the property, team members and guests, need to wear appropriate face coverings over the nose and mouth.
Social distancing will be strictly enforced.
Social distancing will be strictly enforced with clear markers showing where to stand in queue lines for park entry, restrooms, dining, and also where to sit on rides and attractions.
Mobile food ordering, an increased emphasis on cashless transactions.
For your convenience and safety, we have expanded the use of mobile food ordering and increased emphasis on cashless transactions.
Sanitizing superheroes.
Our team members will be sanitizing superheroes.
Brainwashing the next generation of kids and young adults to accept these Orwellian dystopian substandards of living as the new normal, which they're promoting now as normal, natural, and even healthy. It reminds me of the Pizza Palace skit.
Thank you for calling again, sir. I see you live at 736 Montrose Court, but you're calling from your cell phone. Are you at home?
I'm just leaving work, but I'm...
Oh, we can deliver to Bob's Auto Supply. That's at 175 Lincoln Avenue, yes?
No, I'm on my way home. How do you know all this stuff?
We just got wired into the system, sir.
Oh, well, I'd like to order a couple of your double meat special pizzas.
Sure thing. There'll be a new $20 charge for those, sir.
What do you mean?
Sir, the system shows me that your medical records indicate that you have high blood pressure and extremely high cholesterol. Luckily, we have a new agreement with your national health care provider that allows us to sell you double meat pies as long as you agree to waive all future claims of liability.
What?
Do you agree, sir? You can sign the form when we deliver, but there is a charge for processing. The total is $67 even.
$67?
Well, that includes the delivery surcharge of $15 to cover the added risk to our driver of traveling through an orange zone.
I live in an orange zone?
Now you do. Looks like there was another robbery on Montrose yesterday. I'm sure you can afford the $67. You just bought those tickets to Hawaii. They weren't cheap. Oh, but I see you checked out the budget beach bum at the library last week.
All right. I'll get the Sprout subs.
Good choice, sir. Gotta watch that waist, 42 inches. Wow. Man, I'd say tofu and sprouts is like required.
That's how much?
Just between you and me, there's a $3 off coupon in this month's Total Men's Fitness magazine. Your wife Betty subscribes to that, right? Anyhow, clip that and it's $19.99 even. Whoa, looks like you maxed out on all your credit cards. Bring cash, okay?
According to Nesta Webster, a cult is a system of religious beliefs and rituals that is regarded as unorthodox or spurious, with a great devotion to a person, thing, or an idea. But this COVID cult is more of an intellectual cult driven by experts, scientists, the so-called illuminated ones of our generation. But really, it's just guys on the Round Table Group's payroll.
You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, Rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today.
When people hear about this stuff for the first time, the reactions can be unnerving, to say the least.
It can't be like this.
It is this way, man. I'm sorry I exposed you to it, but it is. It's ugly. And I know what you're going through. I know what you're feeling. You're scared.
I'm not scared.
Yes, you are. You're terrified. Everybody goes through that the first time. I went through it.
You see, in the New World Order, it doesn't matter if you intellectually agree or disagree. There is room for neither consent nor rebellion, only compliance. Compliance is rewarded with privileges, as Xerxes says.
Everything you could ever desire. Every happiness you can imagine. I require only that you kneel.
I think we forget at times why we created government in the first place.
We created government as our servant, beholden to us, and possessing no powers except those voluntarily granted to it by us. Now a self-anointed elite would have us believe we're incapable of guiding our own destiny. They practice government by mystery, telling us it's too complex for our understanding. Believing this, they assume we might panic if we were to be told the truth about our problems. There isn't any problem we can't solve if government will give us the facts, tell us what needs to be done, and then get out of the way and let us have at it.
I'll leave you with the reenactment of Orwell's interview.
You once claimed that you have an ability to face unpleasant facts. Is that what you've demonstrated in 1984 by drawing an accurate portrait of the future?
Something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. There will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.